Hello, good morning. It's 7 o'clock. If you're going out today, even us northerners might need our big coats. After a week of storms, torrential rains and floods, get ready for the big chill. There is snow coming. It's Monday, the 8th of January. Hundreds of flood warnings are still in place, and the Met Office says that snow could cause rush hour chaos across the southeast.
Amber warnings for cold weather, yellow warnings for ice across large parts of the country just days after communities were flooded.
Also ahead, ministers meet this morning to consider how post office branch officers who were the victims of a miscarriage of justice can be cleared. The door that blew off an Alaska Airlines jet is found by a school teacher. A rocket to the moon. The first lunar mission in more than 50 years is due to launch in the next few minutes plus.
And the Golden Globe goes to Oppenheimer!
Christopher Nolan's blockbuster about the father of the atomic bomb wins big at the Golden Globes. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk to Rob and Steph about the big stories of the day. Rob, first day back at school for MPs.
Yeah, morning, Jane. They're back after the Christmas break. I think a big story today is going to be this post office scandal. Ministers likely to meet to discuss what can be done to speed up the quashing of those wrongful convictions. Some awkward questions as well for the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey. He was post office minister at the time during the coalition years.
And Steph, the cold weather is here.
It is here. It's no more. It's on its way. This is it. So it's coldest really in the southeast. We've got a very strong wind that's making it feel far colder than it is. And further north, there's also some showers there as well. But it's the southeast that we're watching could bring us some snow.
Well, we shall see. Just a bit late for Christmas. Well, as Steph was saying, after the floods comes the freeze. Over the past week, we have seen storms and torrential rain cause rivers to burst their banks from Gloucestershire to Nottinghamshire. The Environment Agency says more than 1,800 properties have been flooded and communities are still mopping up.
It has happened before, but it's all been thoroughly repaired and tanked since then. Yeah. We were not expecting it because we had a lot of work done on it and we've had it all checked and maintained. It's just, although it's not high, nevertheless it's getting everything wet and it's seeping in as if it's got under the floor.
So Bullstick Stream goes right up into our yard. There's a kind of towpath that we walk behind there. Usually that's, of course, completely underwater now. The flood waters came up very quickly. Since Friday, they've been stable, but it's right up to our back patio, almost to our back door. We have a neighborhood WhatsApp group, and I've never seen it this active in the 3 years we've moved here. Some of our neighbors are dealing with a little bit of flooding in their kitchen. We've been pretty stressed out. On Friday, as I said, it's stabilized since Friday. Right now, we're okay, kind of hoping for the best.
In England, there are still 169 flood warnings and 159 flood alerts in place, but attention is already turning to what is coming next. That is snow, ice and freezing temperatures. Well, let's cross live to our West of England and Wales correspondent Dan Whitehead, who's in Longford in Gloucestershire. Dan, a bit late for a white Christmas, but it looks like it's coming.
Yeah, for these communities here in Longford and elsewhere in the country who've just come off the back of floods, this is not the news that they wanted. The UK Health Security Agency and the Met Office at the weekend issuing this amber warning for cold weather. And it covers large swathes of the country, not just the southwest of England where I am, also the West Midlands, the northwest, East Midlands, right through until midday on Friday. So expect those freezing temperatures right across the week. What does an amber alert mean? Well, according to the UK HSA, it means that this cold weather is going to impact across the whole health service for an extended period of time. So the advice is to check on those people who might be vulnerable. Now, we've heard this morning about another warning as well, this one specifically from the Met Office. This is for a yellow warning of ice in London, in parts of the southeast of England, and also some parts of Northern Ireland. You were mentioning the flood warnings there. We're on the high street here in Longford, which just a couple of days ago was completely underwater. You can see some of the floodwater still remains behind me. It has now started to recede, but this is not what these communities wanted. They are mopping up still. There's lots of debris on the road. And the concern is that this water, this dirty water that remains in streets and communities that have been flooded over the last couple of days could then, of course, turn to ice. That combined with warnings of snow means it's going to be a very tricky couple of days ahead for those communities hit last week.
Okay, Dan, good hat. Thanks very much. Let's bring in Sky meteorologist Steph Golter. He's here. Steph, how cold is it going to get?
Well, it depends where you are, because if you're in the southeast, that's where it's going to be coldest today and tomorrow. We've got this wind coming in from the east and it's tapping into some extremely cold air that we've had in Scandinavia. Now, they've had it cold for Scandinavia, but fortunately, it's going to be slightly diluted by the time it reaches us. But still, a strong wind and a little bit of moisture means that parts of the southeast may see some showers today. Some of them could turn wintry, mostly on the North Downs. So a little bit of a wintry flavour there. But elsewhere, the winds will probably turn northerly later in the week. So for Scotland, that's when they're going to see their snow. It'll continue off and on sort of throughout the week. But further west, where we've had some of the worst of the flooding, there, actually the snow should stay away. So yes, it will be cold, but at least we're not going to have snow to deal with as well.
OK, Steph, warm coats, but don't panic, essentially.
Exactly.
Great. OK, thanks very much. Now to politics, and ministers are meeting this morning to consider how post office branch officers who were wrongly convicted of fraud can be cleared. The Horizon IT system was introduced by the Post Office in 1999. Almost immediately, losses in the system emerged, with the Post Office taking legal action. By 2015, 736 people had been criminally prosecuted, with 700 convicted. A public inquiry into the scandal was established in 2020. To date, 93 convictions have been overturned, with around £138 million paid in compensation. Well, our political correspondent Rob Powell has more on this. Rob, the Justice Secretary looking into how the government can help these victims, and some would say not before time.
Yeah, morning, Jane. I think if you've been campaigning on this for years and years and years, you probably are wondering this morning why it's taken an ITV drama series to kind of prompt the government to whir into action, to look at what can be done to speed up the quashing of some of these convictions. I think we're likely to get meetings of ministers today to discuss how this can be done, stripping the Post Office out of the appeals process potentially. Of course, other campaigners want something more widespread, legislation to get some kind of mass exoneration of sub-postmasters. I think we're also likely to see backbenchers as they return for their first day after the Christmas break, trying to bring a minister to the Commons through an urgent question, something like that, to address some of these issues. And as well as, I think, looking forward, there may well be a little bit of looking backwards at how this was handled by Conservative-led governments in the past when some of these allegations first emerged. There was a lot in the papers over the weekend about how people like Sir Ed Davey, who in 2010 was the minister in the coalition government responsible for the Post Office, how seriously they took some of the accusations and some of the concerns that were being raised by campaigners like Alan Bates. Now, a lot of unhappiness from those campaigners about what went on back then. Sir Ed Davey is not helped by the fact that he is quite fond of calling for people to resign over perceived mishaps or inadequacies. The Times newspaper has clocked up 31 times since 2019 that he has called for someone to resign on his online Twitter X account. So that might be why some people feel it would be appropriate to subject him to a little bit of pressure as MPs come back to Westminster. For their part, the Lib Dems and Ed Davey says that back then he met Alan Bates, that he regrets that he essentially didn't realise that the Post Office was lying to him over concerns about the Horizon software. But I think likely to be the big story that dominates today on the first day back at term for MPs.
OK, Rob, thanks very much. Well, let's take a look at the papers this morning, and the Mail is leading with the Post Office scandal. It says pressure is growing on the government to compensate the thousands of sub-postmasters who were wrongly convicted as part of the Horizon IT scandal. Elsewhere, The Guardian claims a senior Conservative MP has warned his party faces obliteration at the next election. The Times warns that official government forecasts predict 2 million more people will be claiming disability benefit by the end of the decade. Meanwhile, The Telegraph says the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has bowed to rail unions by offering a bumper pay offer to avoid strikes on the London Underground. And the Daily Star has a weather warning for us. They say a 12-day chill and whiteouts are on the way from Scandinavia, as Steph has just been explaining to us. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines now. And Ukraine's military says Russia has launched a large-scale missile attack on several Ukrainian regions in the early hours of the morning. Military officials say the capital, Kyiv, is under threat from ballistic missiles and have urged people to find shelter. They say areas including Zaporizhia and Kharkiv are also under attack. A new national drive to get pupils back into the classroom is being launched today. The Department for Education is promising 80 new attendance hubs across 6 regions of England, bringing the total to 32. It says it'll help nearly 2,000 schools tackle persistent absences. New research has found that the UK is the only country in the G7 where household budgets have not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. The TUC claim families would be £750 a year better off if incomes had grown in line with other leading economies. Al Jazeera has accused Israel of deliberately targeting journalists after 2 of its staff were killed in an airstrike near Rafah in southern Gaza. Mustafa Thuraya and Hamza Dadour died in the strike yesterday. Hamza was the eldest son of Al Jazeera's chief correspondent, Wael Dadour.
What did Hamza do to them? What did the family do to them? What did the safe civilians in the Gaza Strip do to them? But the world is blind to what's happening in the Gaza Strip.
In a statement, the Al Jazeera media network strongly condemned the attack, saying the assassination of Mustafa and Hamza while they were on their way to carry out their duty in the Gaza Strip reaffirms the need to take immediate, necessary legal measures against the occupation forces to ensure that there is no impunity. Hamza is the 5th member of Wael Dadour's family to die since the start of the conflict. He lost his wife, son, daughter and grandson to an Israeli air raid at the end of October. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State is in Abu Dhabi for the latest stage of his tour of the Middle East. Antony Blinken's meeting with Arab leaders in an attempt to prevent the conflict in Gaza from spreading across the region. The missing door that blew off an Alaska Airlines flight in mid-air has been found by a schoolteacher in his garden. Well, Saba Chowdhury has more on this. Saba, so remind us what happened over the weekend with this plane door, and it has at least finally turned up.
Good morning, Jane. Well, the incident took place on Friday, and it was minutes after takeoff from Portland International Airport. The pilots on board a Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft were forced to perform an emergency landing, and this was after a massive hole ripped through the side of the aircraft. Now, luckily, no one was seriously hurt, and the pilots were able to land the plane safely. But as I say, it could have been so much worse, not just for the passengers and the people on the plane, but also those on the ground in terms of debris. That debris was today found by a teacher called Bob in Portland. So a key component of that door that's gone missing, the door plug, has today been found. Now, this door, without a doubt, will be used in the investigation that's currently ongoing to determine the cause of what happened with this particular incident. But the anxiety amongst passengers, I'm sure, is really adding, especially after, or given the fact that this is the 4th issue with Alaska Airlines flight in the past 2 months. 4 incidents have been reported by pilots to the airline. So this, as I say, will be adding to anxiety amongst flyers.
Indeed. Seba, thanks very much. Well, still to come on the programme. At 7:30, we're going to be talking to the Pitch Perfect actress, Brittany Snow, about her role in a new film highlighting the plight of women trying to seek an abortion in the United States. A little later, we'll hear from the Conservative MP, David Davis, who's urging the government to hold accountable those responsible for the Post Office scandal. Well, let's tell you a little bit more about a story about the Peregrine Mission 1. It is attempting to become the first US lunar lander since Apollo 17 more than 50 years ago. This is the live shot that we are getting from NASA. It's going to take off very, very soon. Our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, has more on this. Thomas, what are they trying to achieve here? Just explain it to us in simple terms.
Yeah, you're looking at the United Launch Alliance Vulcan Centaur on Cape Canaveral in Florida there. It's due for launch any minute now. The launch window is about 45 minutes. It has to be quite precise in order to get to the moon at a point and so that it can enter orbit, and it will be going for a landing, they hope, on the 23rd of February. Now, this is a really interesting mission, not just because it's the first US lander to go to the moon since Apollo 17 in December 1972, but this time NASA is not at the controls. It has bought a ticket to ride. It has 5 instruments on board, but it is paying a private US company to develop the rocket and another one to actually build, design and control the lander. Now, this is controversial because alongside those instruments there will be commercial payloads too, including some human remains that have been cremated and are being taken to the moon, and indeed also a marketing stunt by a sports drink manufacturer. And many scientists feel this is all a little bit icky, but for NASA it means they can control the costs, so they're paying just $108 million to get to the moon, which is an absolute bargain. But to get to such a low price, they are taking a massive gamble here. That rocket has never flown before. The lander has never attempted to leave Earth's orbit before. So this technology is really being tested well beyond its limits as far as the existing tests down here on Earth. So it'll be interesting to see whether this actually happens. We know that getting to space isn't easy, but United Launch Alliance have flown other designs of rocket before, just not this one. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
And in terms of what NASA will benefit, the fact that they are sort of outsourcing various elements of it, I mean, it's still going to be of enormous scientific benefit to NASA, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, this isn't a purely scientific mission. They don't have a particular goal, but they have got 5 instruments on board, including one designed at the Open University in Milton Keynes, where they have an instrument that will be looking at the moon's extraordinarily thin atmosphere and trying to look at what happens to water molecules.
OK, thanks so much, Thomas. So it's 1 minute to launch before this United Launch Alliance from Cape Canaveral in Florida sets off, hoping to land on the moon on the 23rd of February. Let's listen in.
BE4 start box, go. Status check. Go Vulcan. Go Centaur. Go Peregrine. 15. Done.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. We have ignition. And liftoff of the first United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket, launching a new era in spaceflight to the moon and beyond.
Engines operating. 2 good SRBs, hitting peak pressure on the SRBs. Everything looking good. Pitching out programs in, coming into normal rates for that event. We have good hydraulic pressure on both engines, good chamber pressure on both engines, everything looking good. Coming up on 60 seconds into the flight, everything looking good. 2 good engines, 2 good SRBs. Body rates look good, nice and smooth. And we've hit our first throttle point on the BE4s, everything looking good. And we have passed through Mach 1, we are now supersonic, coming up on max Q. At max dynamic pressure, everything looking good. We're rolling off on the SRBs. And we have cutoff on the SRBs, coming up on jettison in approximately 30 seconds. "15 seconds to SRB jet. BE4s continue to operate nominally. Seeing expected PU activity on the booster mains. And we have separation of both SRBs. Everything looking good. BE4s continue to operate normally. Coming up on 2 minutes into the mission. We are now 17 miles in altitude.
We just heard confirmation of solid rocket booster jettison. We have about 3 minutes until we
Well,
reach
there,
our
a successful launch of the United Launch Alliance from Cape Canaveral. The Peregrine mission. Let's bring in our science correspondent, Thomas Moore. Thomas, what are the big hurdles, the milestones that this rocket will have to overcome in the next few minutes and hours that we know it's been a success?
Yeah, so far so good, but it has to get to orbit. It's got a few minutes to go yet. Then it will do one rotation around the Earth. Then the Peregrine mission 1 lander will separate from the rocket and will veer off, be slingshot towards the moon, travelling at very high speed, while the rocket and human remains and DNA from 60 people, including Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry and 3 other Star Trek actors, astronauts and various others, all that will head towards the sun, where the rocket and those remains will remain in perpetual orbit, something that they clearly wanted to do, be part of the celestial makeup. The lander itself will then head to the moon. It will do a series of orbits around the moon while it tries to find the exact spot that it wants to land. It's waiting for sunrise, so the lighting conditions are right over there. And then on the 23rd of February, it will attempt a robotic landing, and then it will remain there for a series of days while all those scientific experiments are undertaken.
Thomas, thanks so much. Before we leave the story, let's just look back again at the launch.
And liftoff of the first United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket, launching a new era in spaceflight to the moon and beyond.
Engines operating. 2 good SRBs, hitting peak pressure on the SRBs. Everything looking good.
We're going to be talking a lot more about this later on in the programme, so stay tuned. About 8:45, we're going to be talking to a space journalist on this as well. Well, let's get more on our big story of the day, the post office scandal, which saw hundreds of sub-postmasters falsely convicted of stealing money due to a faulty IT system. Well, the scandal has been thrust back into the spotlight by a TV drama. Let's talk to Conservative peer Lord Arbuthnot, who features in that drama. He played a prominent role in seeking justice for those affected from the very beginning, really, and he joins me now. How do you feel about the fact that it appears to have taken a TV drama to actually get some kind of action for all of those who have been wronged here?
Well, drama has its important role to play. But the problem before was that the sub-postmasters were failed by virtually every sector of society, including by politicians, because I was just representative on that TV drama of a number of MPs who were working. We failed to achieve anything. It was Alan Bates taking the thing to court and having a fantastic judgment from Mr. Peter Fraser. And then the TV drama that have really caught, first, the imagination of the Court of Appeal, and second, the imagination of the public. But the sub-postmasters have been really failed by the legal system before that, by the corporate system, by the media, by everybody. And so I'm delighted that at last it's got to the attention of the public.
Who do you blame for not taking it seriously at the time? Because, of course, Alan Bates and the others, they did the right thing. They went to their local MPs to complain and to raise the issue. He was very clear-sighted about what was going wrong. You got on board. Why did others in government not take it seriously?
There was the problem that the post office was the most trusted brand in the country. The problem that the court system did not work for the sub-postmasters. Lawyers were acting for the client of the post office, and the post office had deep pockets, and the sub-postmasters did not. The media found it difficult to cover because it was complicated, and who wants to take on the post office? And these people had been convicted of theft. Why believe them? It was a series of catastrophes for the sub-postmasters. And I just take my hat off to Alan Bates and all of his sub-postmasters who were working so hard together, that they persevered. And look what they're now beginning to achieve, but we're still only in the foothills of what we've actually got to achieve.
Indeed. I mean, do you think that Ed Davey has questions to answer? He was the minister in charge of the Post Office at the time.
Actually, I think that's a bit of a red herring. I think that what Ed Davey, when he came into office as the Post Office Minister, was doing, he was following the line of the previous Labour government, namely, this is an arm's length organisation, which the government was simply refusing to oversee properly. So, yes, all ministers who are involved in this, Labour, Lib Dem and Conservative, have got questions to answer. I wouldn't concentrate too much on any one party, because no party comes out of it well.
No, indeed. I mean, David Cameron, Prime Minister at the time, I mean, are you aware whether the claims made it all the way to his desk, whether he ignored what the postmasters were saying?
I don't actually know whether it got onto his desk. I don't remember putting it onto his desk myself. But I mean, certainly I wrote to David Cameron, along with all MPs, to ask, have you got similar problems to the ones that are cropping up in my constituency? But as I say, none of us politicians come out of this well.
The Post Office itself, we talked about it being, such a big corporate entity. Should it now be stripped of its power to prosecute cases, and should it lose an ability to really have an influence over the appeals as well?
Well, the Post Office cannot be trusted by the sub-postmasters, and it should not prosecute anybody. The idea that a corporation which itself is being investigated by the police should start prosecuting people is absurd. So that'd be quite wrong. But I think they stopped prosecuting people in 2015. That not before time.
What would you like to see the government do to make this right?
One of the greatest problems is that there have been between 700 and 900 convictions of sub-postmasters, and only 93 of those convictions have been overturned. That's an awfully small, pathetically small number. And I think that this is a mass problem which has got to be dealt with in a mass way. And I think that Parliament has got to step in and say that post office convictions are not safe. We've seen the way that investigators behaved, and they behaved in a way which was contrary to the rule of law, and these convictions have got to be set aside.
Well, we shall see. Lord Arbuthnot, very good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, it is cold out there. Let's get a look at the weather in more detail.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Conditions will be quiet and cold this week with a freshening breeze bringing a significant wind chill to southern parts of the country. This morning, there'll be a widespread frost, overnight temperatures having dropped close to or below freezing. Patches of dense freezing fog over parts of Ireland, Scotland and northwest England will be slow to clear. Some may linger throughout the day.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Still to come this hour, we're going to be joined by the star of a new Oscar shortlisted short film, shining a light on the dangers faced by women seeking abortions in the United States.
So the Taliban government have been in power since 2021, and in that time, they have built bridges and built roads and infrastructure, and the country is coming to a point of peace. But they just don't recognize women. Women's education after the 6th grade doesn't exist. Women are not allowed to go to beauty parlors, which have been closed. There are parks are closed, they can't work for NGOs. And at this current day and age, that is unacceptable. That's 20 million Afghan women who are being treated as second-class citizens, and that's what I tried to highlight with my film. Well, Afghanistan has such a unique history in the sense that in my lifetime, the country's flag has changed 19 times. It's just a chaotic time of government after government, and every single time, the women have always been victims to all these new different regimes, and they've always been impacted, and it's just enough. There is no excuse for women not to be able to study. 3,000 Afghan women were meant to join the Afghan service as doctors, but the board examinations were cancelled and they are just at home doing nothing. As a country, we need stability and our economy to rise. We need all the help we can get. So it just doesn't make sense that this policy set forth by the Afghan government is in place. It's completely ridiculous. The world is at a time where there's just chaos and upsetting events happening everywhere, but at the same time, the Afghan women are being forgotten. And this is what I've tried to do with my film Yellow, and it's resonated so much around the world. I get messages every day from people who've seen it and feel that it's a message that needs to be told. Women are becoming invisible again. And as an Afghan myself, I can't let that happen. It's my duty as an artist and as a filmmaker to try to bring that to life.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News Breakfast at exactly 18 minutes past 7. The first rocket to the moon since 1972 was launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida. The Apollo mission's more than 50 years ago. If it all goes well, it will attempt to land on the surface of the moon with scientific equipment to gather data, paving the way for a future human mission.
Everything looking good.
Now, since the US Supreme Court's controversial decision to abolish the national right to abortion in 2022, the issue has become a key battleground for both Republicans and Democrats. Now, a new Oscar shortlisted short film about a single mother who crosses state borders in search of an abortion is shining a light on the lengths some women are forced to go to find help. Well, let's talk to the star of that show, Brittany Snow, in just a moment. First, let's take a little look at the film.
I've come all the way from Arkansas.
Yeah, you and everybody from that state. And all the other ones, too.
please. I'm desperate.
Well, the actress Brittany Snow, who plays Rachel in the film, joins us now from Los Angeles. Brittany, lovely to talk to you today. Why did you want to get involved with this film?
I think it's a very important issue, obviously one that's very topical to so many of us, specifically in the United States, and something that we definitely need to discuss. And what I loved about this short was it didn't do it in a didactic way. It merely showed a lens and the light on something that I felt was heartbreaking and poignant without pointing any fingers. And I feel like a lot of people can take a lot of lessons from it without it being preachy.
Were you not afraid of stepping into such a political subject? Because, of course, many actors and actresses go out of their way to avoid a role that could polarise an audience.
Oh, I think that's some of the best parts of doing anything artistic is putting what you feel and what you want out into the world, whether it is polarizing or not, I guess. And I think the great thing about this short is that it really just poses a lot of questions, and it doesn't really necessarily point it in any direction to preach. And I think that that's something that I really strive to do in my career as well, is just to pose a lot of questions. So I was grateful to be a part of it.
And how would you describe the reaction to the film so far?
It's been really amazing to see how many people have commented on it and take it in. I've gotten even some people who have changed their minds, whether it be from one side to the other. And I think that that's really what I set out to do. And I think what the filmmakers really set out to do was just not necessarily change people's minds, but see it from a different perspective.
And you mentioned the filmmaker, Nasrin Chowdhury, a British screenwriter and director. What was it like working with her?
It was so great. I mean, when I read the short, I actually don't think I've ever acted in a short film before. And so I read it, with a little bit of hesitation, not that I wouldn't do it, but just I was like, this better be good. And when I read, there's a twist that happens that I will not give away. And it viscerally spoke to me. It went through my entire body. And I talked to her right away. And I said, you are so talented and I need to be a part of this. Without question. So I respected her talent and I knew exactly what she was set out to do, which I think is really a marking of a great director.
And of course, it is an election year in the United States. How great an issue do you think abortion is going to be in the next few months?
I think it's hugely important. I think it's going to be a very heated debate. Yes, polarizing, but I think something that we do need to speak about. And I think that's what I love about the arts. And I think that's what I love about this short film is that it is an election year. And I think people will be talking about it, hopefully due to this short.
How do you feel about the state of democracy in America at the moment?
I have my opinions. I wish things were, all sorts of different ways, but I will be silent about this for now because I do, love my country, but I think, you guys, I wish I was over there sometimes.
The other big story, of course, across your side of the pond overnight is the Golden Globes. It's been a big night for Barbie, big night for Oppenheimer, big night for Succession. What are your thoughts about the winners?
I loved Oppenheimer. I loved Barbie. I think that Barbie also, like this short, did a really good job of painting a picture of something without it being too heavy-handed and also posing a lot of questions and doing it in an entertaining, fascinating way. So I loved that movie. I didn't get to go to the awards, which is quite all right. I was in my pajamas. I'm in my pajamas now under here.
Don't worry, I was in my pajamas as well when the Golden Globes was on. I was fast asleep.
Yes, exactly.
Well, listen, lovely to talk to you, and it's a really fascinating film, and it is a short, so, lots of people should be able to watch it. Brittany Snow, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on Sky.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as we were saying, Christopher Nolan's blockbuster biopic about the father of the atomic bomb took home the top gong at the Golden Globes overnight. There were wins for the Oppenheimer director, as well as his leading man, Cillian Murphy, But there was upset for fan favourite Barbie, as Poor Things pipped it to Best Comedy Musical, although, of course, Barbie did get other honours. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
And the Golden Globe goes to Barbie.
Pitched as the Battle of Barbenheimer, this year's Golden Globes dominated by two films that, when combined, made over $2 billion, while Barbie was recognised for its box office achievement.
Thank you. We would like to dedicate this to every single person on the planet who dressed up and went to the greatest place on earth, the movie theatres.
This was Christopher Nolan's night. His nuclear arms race thriller taking home Best Film, Best Director, as well as a win for its leading man.
First question, do I have lipstick all over my nose? No, I'm just going to leave it. I was in the hands of a visionary director, a master, and I want to thank Chris and Emma.
Amy, are you okay?
Yep. As for TV, while chaotic road rage thriller Beef and frenetic kitchen drama The Bear both went away with 3 Globes each. Perhaps more predictable, the cold-blooded power plays of the final season of Sky Atlantic's Succession sweeping the board, with wins for Sarah Snook.
This is really heavy.
Matthew McFadden.
I just adored every second playing the weird and wonderful human grease stain that is Tom Wamsgard.
And Kieran Culkin, rather fittingly lording it up over his rivals.
This is a nice moment. Suck it, Pedro. Sorry.
British showrunner Jesse Armstrong admitting it hadn't been an easy decision to end the series.
We decided this was the right time to end the show, and that was very bittersweet.
And the Golden Globe goes to Oppenheimer!
The first big awards event of the year, recognising the huge cultural impact of some of the most critically acclaimed drama we've seen in a long time. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
That's been a fantastic 12 months on the screen, hasn't it? Still to come, we're going to take a look at the new exhibition bringing the stark reality of homelessness to Parliament.
This is a piece of hardware built at the Open University in Milton Keynes. It's called a mass spectrometer, but what that is a device that will land on the surface of the moon on this mission, and it will measure the composition of the lunar atmosphere, very, very thin lunar atmosphere, less than a millionth of the thickness of the atmosphere on Earth. And it will basically, it acts like a weighing scales. So it separates the atmospheric molecules according to how heavy they are, and we know that water molecules weigh 18, nitrogen weighs 28, so we can identify what those molecules are. When we did land on the moon, we put humans on there, and the initial idea was that the moon was quite dry. It seemed to be a dry, barren, dusty place. But more recently, in the last 10 years or so, we've had orbiters going around the moon, which is starting to reveal a different picture, and we're getting suggestions that there's actually a very tenuous water cycle going on the moon, with kind of water molecules moving around the surface, maybe getting stuck at the poles and frozen down as ice where it's very, very cold. And also techniques have improved. So the last time an instrument like this went to the moon was 50 years ago. Technology moves on. So, this mission is the first time to go and do this kind of science again after 50 years. I mean, the moon is it's getting to be a busy place with missions. As you've probably seen on your coverage. What's different about this mission is that it's commercially led. So it's kind of there's a global feeling that the best way to explore space, and the moon is the nearest place to go, so this is where you're going to go and try this out in the first place, is to get everybody involved. So it's not just a kind of a national agency endeavour, but it's involving commercial companies and universities, and trying to bring that all together to make it more sustainable and a cheaper way to explore. One of the reasons people are really interested in water on the moon is that it might help sustain exploration there. So if we want to put astronauts on the moon, if we want to take a bottle of water up to them, which weighs half a kilogram for a bottle of water, it's going to take about £500,000 to do that because of lifting it through the Earth's gravity field. So one of the ideas is that if you can find appreciable quantity of water on the moon and purify it, bottle it, sell it for less than £500,000, then you've got a business case. Now that's not my bag, but you can see how using resources locally and not having to take everything with you in a massive spacecraft can make space exploration more agile.
And liftoff of the first United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket, launching a new era in spaceflight to the moon and
Fantastic
beyond.
pictures, aren't they? At exactly 18 minutes past 7 this morning, the first rocket to the moon was launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida, the first since the Apollo missions more than 50 years ago. If all goes well, it'll attempt to land on the surface with scientific equipment to gather data, paving the way for a future human mission. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore has more. Thomas, when's it going to land?
So it's due to do a series of orbits and then land on the moon on the 23rd of February. It has to wait for particular light conditions before it can do that safely. And that's why we are so well ahead of the actual launch day. It only takes less than a week to get to the moon itself. So they want to make sure that everything good launch. They've got a series of payloads on board. This is the first commercial mission from the United States, which is really interesting. It just a big gear shift there from NASA. They're not at the controls. They've just bought a ticket to ride. They got 5 experiments on board, but they've paid this other company, Astrobotic, to develop this robotic lander, and they are paying just $108 million to transport their kit to the lunar surface. But it is the private company that is taking all the risk. And part of that risk was actually sending everything up on an untested rocket. This was the first launch of this particular rocket, but it seems to have gone completely to plan. It's now in orbit around the Earth, doing a series of engine burns before it slingshots this capsule, this Astrobotic lander, which is the size of a garden shed, out towards the moon in the coming minutes.
Thomas, why is there interest in going back to the moon now? Why has it taken 50 years for the idea of revisiting it?
It's because they realise that there is water on the moon, and that has given an awful lot of interest to people going back there, using the moon as a staging post to travel perhaps to Mars or even beyond. Because with water you can make oxygen, you can obviously hydrate astronauts, but also there's a possibility of making rocket fuel itself. Now, it would be extremely expensive to lift so much water off Earth because of it has to escape gravity. But if there's water there on the moon, it becomes relatively cheap to get to these far-flung destinations within the solar system. That's really driven this new interest. It's not just about the science on the moon now, it is about the practical application of space exploration. So the beginning of a really exciting era in space travel.
OK, Thomas, thanks so much. Now, from today, politicians, members of the House of Lords and visitors to the Houses of Parliament will be able to see a powerful new exhibition documenting homelessness in the UK from across the last 6 years. Well, joining me now in the studio is the Chief Executive of the charity Crisis, Matt Downey, and also the Labour MP, Paula Barker, who is also co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Ending Homelessness. Matt, to you first of all, tell me about the exhibition. What are you hoping it'll achieve?
Well, it's a beautiful exhibition detailing the kind of the light and the dark of homelessness, so the darkness of people's circumstances, but also the light of their potential. And it brings forward the humanity of people, because quite often we stereotype homelessness. We see people on the streets and we blame them for their situations. This really brings that into a different light and says, no, these are real lives that could have been, where homelessness could have been prevented. And it's a message that can be taken to Paula's colleagues in Parliament to say, actually, there are better choices parliamentarians can make to make sure people don't end up homeless to start with.
I'm just looking at these images. They are beautiful and stark images, a lot of them. Paula, why do you think it is important that this is displayed in the House of Parliament?
Well, as Matt has already said, it's very important for us to be able to see the potential of these people. Every single person who is homeless has their own story to tell. They all have their own dreams and aspirations. And you see so often people walking past people on the street who are homeless as if they don't exist. These have an individual story to tell, and Mark has captured that in each of his photographs. And I think it's really, really important, as we make legislation going forward, that we have that front and centre in our minds.
And Matt, homelessness rising again, according to analysis, 14% higher than last year. Why is it going up? Is it as simple as the cost of living crisis, or is it something more complex than that?
Well, the cost of living crisis is certainly making things worse, but homelessness is going up because the causes of homelessness aren't being dealt with. The really high rents that people experience, the fact that there's simply not enough housing to go around. So the causes are not being dealt with, and the consequences are being badly served too. And this exhibition is especially timely because this year the government are planning to legislate to actually criminalise people who are homeless. And that's something that's completely unacceptable from our perspective. And, instead of punishing people for their homelessness, what we really need to see is those causes dealt with.
Paula, do you think MPs see, in inverted commas, homeless people? I mean, just here in Westminster, there are the homeless people on the streets all over London. Do you think MPs are guilty, as perhaps lots of other people are, of not seeing homeless people, of them becoming invisible?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's absolutely a pertinent comment to make. And I think we have to deal, as Mass has already said, with the reasons why people become homeless. I want to see services that are trauma-informed and trauma-led at its very heart. And I want to be able to give people not just hope, but a future. And I think that this exhibition is really important in doing that, and hopefully will focus all colleagues' minds on how we can make things better.
Matt, what would you like to see the government do to make homelessness better, to reduce it, to help those on the streets?
Well, first and foremost, there's no time like the present to say that the way out of all forms of homelessness is, A, to have enough homes to go around so that, people have somewhere to live, and then if people do have support needs, that, as Paula says, they get trauma-informed, high-quality care. That's it. That's, every case of homelessness is different, but at its heart, everyone needs somewhere to live, and if you need help, you get that help. And really what that means is you need a strategy to deliver that right across the board and to stop sort of short-term or misplaced initiatives like the criminal justice bill that's saying that people should be punished and fined or imprisoned for their homelessness.
Paula, do you think in an election year, as we anticipate it is, that there is the political will to focus on this subject?
I think one of the things that concerns me is that when you look back to Suella Braverman's time in office, she talked about homelessness being a choice, and she spoke about, getting rid of tents, and the criminal justice bill, as Mass has already said, will criminalise people who are living on the streets. I think, our commitment from Labour's point of view is that we will build 300,000 homes initially per year. And of course, we would want to see that be much, much more. For me, there has to be a fully cross-departmental strategy. And when Labour left office in 2010, we had practically eradicated homelessness and rough sleeping. And I think that there is definitely, a concerted effort and a will to be able to do that again.
And finally, Matt, these images that we're seeing, they're on display in the Houses of Parliament. So, of course, unless you've got access and a parliamentary pass or a visitor, you can't see them. But they are going to go out around the country at some point, aren't they?
Yeah, I'd urge everyone to look online and to even buy the book. Mark's work is absolutely vital as far as I'm concerned, because it does something we all need to do. It's just to see people who are homeless as equals, as people with potential, and not simply those people who you might walk past on the street.
Matt Downey from Crisis and Paula Barker, Labour MP and Chair of the All-Party Group on Ending Homelessness. Thank you both a lot for coming in and talking to us. Right, let's take a quick look at this morning's sports news. And Liverpool are through to the fourth round of the FA Cup final. They beat Arsenal 2-0. After dominating the first half, Arsenal fell behind late in the second half. Trent Alexander-Arnold's free kick headed into his own goal by Arsenal defender Jakub Kiwior. And then deep into stoppage time, Liverpool broke away to make it 2-0. Luis Diaz scoring to seal the win. The result means it's now 3 consecutive defeats for Mikel Arteta's side, and they're without a win in 4. FA Cup holders Man City booked their place in the fourth round. An emphatic start. Pep Guardiola's side thrashed Huddersfield 5-0, with 2 goals coming from England midfielder Phil Foden. And Chelsea striker Sam Kerr is to miss the rest of the season after picking up a serious knee injury in training. And should we take a look at some of the back pages? Let's. Wham bam, says the Sun, after Patrick Bamford's stunner during Leeds' 3-0 FA Cup victory over Peterborough. The Eye has Luis Diaz celebrating Liverpool's win away at Arsenal. Despite their defeat, the misfiring Gunners may not be shopping for a new striker after all, it says. And The Times also features Arsenal's FA Cup exit with a quote from Mikel Arteta: "We must get our heads right."
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weather conditions quiet and cold this week with a freshening breeze, bringing a significant wind chill to southern parts of the country. This morning, there'll be a widespread frost, overnight temperatures having dropped close to or below freezing. Patches of dense freezing fog over parts of Ireland, Scotland and northwest England will be slow to clear. Some may linger throughout the day. Showers in the southeast will turn wintry over the high ground as they spread westward.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up on Sky News Breakfast, a rocket to the moon has been launched in Florida, the first since the Apollo missions more than 50 years ago. Hello, good morning. It's 8 o'clock. If you're going out this morning, even us northerners might need are big coats. After a week of storms, torrential rain and floods, get ready for the big chill. We're told there's snow coming. But the weather was good in Florida, good enough in fact, to launch a rocket to the moon. It's Monday, the 8th of January.
And liftoff of the first United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket, launching a new era in spaceflight.
The first US lunar mission in more than 50 years lifts off from Cape Canaveral. Hundreds of flood warnings are still in place, and the Met Office says that snow could cause rush hour chaos across the southeast.
An amber warning for cold weather, a yellow warning for ice, and all this comes just days after hundreds of communities were flooded.
Also ahead, ministers meet this morning to consider how post office branch officers who were the victims of a miscarriage of justice can be cleared. The door that blew off an Alaska Airlines jet in midair is found by a schoolteacher.
And the Golden Globe goes to Oppenheimer!
Christopher Nolan's blockbuster about the father of the atomic bomb wins big at the Golden Globes. Well, good morning and thanks a lot for joining us. Rob and Steph are here with the headlines. And Rob, the MPs are back after a Christmas break. What's on their agenda today?
Yeah, morning, Jane. I think the big story today may well be the Post Office Horizon scandal. There's going to be a meeting involving the Justice Secretary. He's looking at potentially ways to speed up quashing those convictions. You had a former Tory MP, current Tory peer who's campaigned on the issue, saying that they should all just be set aside en masse and that Parliament should intervene. I think we might likely see something covered on this on the floor of the House today as well.
And Steph, we're all going to be wrapping up warmer.
That's right. The cold weather is here. Some places will see some snow, but it's not going to be everyone by any stretch of the imagination. So we'll be looking at exactly where is going to see some snow and how much.
OK, Steph, thank you both very much. But first, let's remind you that at exactly 18 minutes past 7, the US launched its first rocket to the moon since the Apollo missions more than 50 years ago. Well, our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, was watching the launch and joins us now. Thomas, just remind us, what is the point of what they're trying to achieve here?
Yeah, look, this wasn't just another space launch. This was really significant, not just because it's the first time since Apollo 17 back in 1972, but this is the first commercial venture from the United States. So NASA is on board, but it's not at the controls. And that's a big gear shift, a new era in space exploration. Why? Well, it brings down the cost. NASA hopes that private companies getting involved will lead to innovation that brings down the cost of getting to the moon. And it really wants to go back there because it sees the moon as a staging post for going beyond, perhaps to Mars, deeper into the solar system. And it's the water on the moon that will allow them to do that, not just to hydrate astronauts, but also to provide oxygen and even rocket fuel in a really cheap way. And that is the interest. So one of the experiments on board has been designed by the Open University in the UK. That will be looking at the movement of water molecules within the very thin atmosphere of the moon. But it is this commercial venture. They're paying just $108 million, and that should keep the price down for future missions. That's the excitement. But it has led to slight controversy because there are other commercial payloads on board, including human remains that have been cremated and also a marketing stunt by a sports drink manufacturer. And some scientists feel that their experiments shouldn't be going to space alongside what they would see as rather trivial cargoes.
OK, Thomas, thanks very much. Well, let's bring you back down to earth and weather in the UK now. And after the floods comes the freeze. Over the past week, we've seen storms and torrential rain cause rivers to burst their banks from Gloucestershire to Nottinghamshire. The Environment Agency says more than 1,800 properties have been flooded and communities are still mopping up.
It has happened before, but it's all been thoroughly repaired and tanked since then. Yeah. We were not expecting it because we had a lot of work done on it and we've had it all checked and maintained. It's just, although it's not high, nevertheless it's getting everything wet and it's seeping in as if it's got under the floor.
So Bull's Extreme goes right up into our yard. There's a kind of towpath that we walk behind there. Usually that's of course completely underwater now. The flood waters came up very quickly. Since Friday they've been stable, but it's right up to our back patio, almost to our back door. We have a neighborhood WhatsApp group, and I've never seen it this active in the 3 years we've moved here. Some of our neighbors are dealing with a little bit of flooding in their kitchen. We've been pretty stressed out. On Friday, as I said, it's stabilized since Friday. Right now we're okay, kind of hoping for the best.
Well, in England, there are still 169 flood warnings and 159 flood alerts in place, but attention is already turning to what is coming next. That is snow, ice and freezing temperatures. Well, let's cross live to our west of England and Wales correspondent Dan Whitehead, who's in Longford in Gloucestershire. They're preparing for the cold weather there, Dan, but they're still very much mopping up, aren't they?
Yeah, it was only at the weekend that the high street that I'm just stood beside here in Longford in Gloucester was underwater, the houses bailing out water from their homes. That has now receded, that water, but you can still see that the floodplains right behind me in the fields and stuff are underwater, and that is the concern for those communities. It's the UK Health Security Agency and the Met Office which has issued this amber warning for cold weather. It lasts right through until midday on Friday. It affects not only where I am here in the southwest, but also the West Midlands, the northwest of England, the East Midlands, and as I say, it's going to last all week. What does an amber warning mean? Well, the government says that it could have an extended impact on health services, informing people to check on those vulnerable people over 65, to check that they are okay, and that actually keeping homes warm, 18 degrees and above, could be more difficult for vulnerable people. So that's the amber warning in place, but we've had another fresh warning today from the Met Office specifically. That's a yellow weather warning for ice, and that affects London. It affects parts of the southeast of England and also parts of Northern Ireland. But all this comes on top of the fact, as you mentioned, still 169 flood warnings in place, and in parts of the middle of England and the southeast of England, where those communities are still mopping up. The last thing they need now are these freezing temperatures, because the concern is that low-lying water and the water that's still on some of the roads in those flooded communities could freeze and turn to ice and create even more dangerous conditions.
OK, Dan, thanks a lot. Well, let's bring in Steph Golter. Steph, how cold is it going to get?
Well, currently it's -7.5 in parts of Scotland. So that's a little bit chilly. It's quite chilly. I think we could agree. But it's going to be the southeast which has the biggest shock, because we've got our temperatures lower than average compared to elsewhere. And it's also been so mild here recently. For Scandinavia, they've had some really, really exceptionally cold conditions, and we're sort of tapping into that. Now, fortunately, it's diluted a little bit by the time it reaches us, but it does mean the weather over the southeast is kind of most concern in the next 24 hours or so. We're already seeing some showers. The showers at the moment that I'm seeing reported are rain rather than sleet or snow, but that's not to say over the higher ground later on we could see some snow. Now, I think mostly it's going to be the North Downs that see the wintry weather, if we see any, but it's not going to be everybody. And even over this week, we're not going to have a complete blanket of snow covering the whole of Britain and Ireland. It is going to be cold, we're all going to see that, but only a few of us, mostly over higher ground and in the east, are going to see any wintry weather at all.
OK, so those of us affected, definitely wrap up warm. The rest of you just...
but don't panic.
Consider yourself lucky, don't panic. OK. Reassuring. Right, let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines now. And Ukraine's military says Russia has launched a large-scale missile attack on several Ukrainian regions in the early hours of the morning. Military officials say the capital, Kiev, is under threat from ballistic missiles and have urged people to find shelter. They say areas including Zaporizhia and Kharkiv are also under attack. A new national drive to get pupils back into the classroom is being launched today. The Department for Education is promising 18 new attendance hubs across 6 regions in England, bringing the total to 32. It says it'll help nearly 2,000 schools tackle persistent absences. New research has found the UK is the only country in the G7 where household budgets have not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. The TUC claim that families would be £750 a year better off if incomes had grown in line with other leading economies. Al Jazeera has accused Israel of deliberately targeting journalists after 2 of its staff were killed in an airstrike near Rafah in southern Gaza. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, is in Jerusalem. Alistair, serious charges from Al Jazeera. Has Israel responded?
Said that they did strike a vehicle in southern Gaza that was containing a number of people, and they said one of those was someone they believed to be a terror operative, in their words, who was operating a drone. Now, there are some contrary reports saying that the drone's being operated for journalistic purposes, to gather pictures, not for any kind of fighting or terror purposes. But in that strike, 2 journalists were killed. One of them, the son of the Al Jazeera bureau chief in Gaza, Wael al-Dadoud, who's already lost his wife, 2 of his other children, and one of his grandchildren as well. So not only personally has he paid an almighty price during the war in Gaza, but actually journalists and the journalistic community there too. At least 79 journalists are calculated to have been killed during the fighting. Palestinian journalists, I should say, foreign journalists like myself, are not allowed into Gaza, or at least not unilaterally. Sometimes there are opportunities to go in on Israeli military embeds, but there is no access being allowed in for foreign journalists. And so the Palestinian journalists who work for channels like our own and others around the world are doing so under immense risk of being killed, as was evident yesterday.
OK, Ali, thanks very much. Now, ministers will meet this morning to consider how to clear the names of hundreds of post office branch managers who were wrongly convicted of fraud. The Horizon IT system was introduced by the Post Office in 1999. Almost immediately, losses in the system emerged, with the Post Office taking legal action. By 2015, 736 people had been criminally prosecuted, with 700 convicted. A public inquiry into the scandal was established in 2020. To date, 93 convictions have been overturned, with around £138 million paid in compensation. Well, a little earlier, the Conservative peer Lord Arbuthnot told this programme that postmasters had been failed by every section of society and that Parliament should step in to overturn their convictions.
One of the greatest problems is that there have been between 700 and 900 convictions of sub-postmasters, and only 93 of those convictions have been overturned. That's an awfully small, pathetically small number. And I think that this is a mass problem which has got to be dealt with in a mass way. And I think that Parliament has got to step in and say that post office convictions are not safe. We've seen the way that investigators behaved, and they behaved in a way which was contrary to the rule of law, and these convictions have got to be set aside.
Well, nodding along to that, Labour Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reid is here. Steve, what do you think should be done?
Well, good morning. Well, I mean, certainly this is one of the gravest miscarriages of justice we've seen in British legal history, and it's been dragging on for in excess of 2 decades now. And I've spoken to sub-postmasters in my own constituency who are victims of this scandal. People have lost their livelihoods, their reputations, their savings, their pensions. Some people have even died of old age. This has gone on for so long. So I completely agree that those individuals who have still got convictions for crimes for which they were not responsible need to be exonerated, they need to be compensated, and that needs to happen quickly. Now, as I understand it, the Justice Secretary is looking at whether there's a legislative route for this to be done through Parliament, rather than expecting either the public inquiry to do it piecemeal or each of those individuals to have to go to court one by one to seek exoneration and their conviction being overturned. We will look at what the government brings forward. Constitutionally, it's very unusual to do it that way, but I think the gravity of the crisis and the level of the injustice does mean that we have to look at doing something to support these people. 2 decades, many of them are very elderly now. They deserve their reputations back, and they deserve what remains of their futures back.
While these prosecutions were going through, the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time was Keir Starmer, of course. Did he take his eye off the ball? Does he have questions to answer, do you think?
Well, the CPS doesn't work like that. It's not the guy at the top that takes the decisions. They have individual officers that will be taking decisions. But from what we can see, the Post Office was blatantly lying to people about their role in all of this. And there are huge questions for the Post Office to answer about their role. The public inquiry, the investigation that's underway, will give us more evidence that we can use there. But surely, I think, the priority right now is to get justice for those people whose lives were utterly destroyed by this. They deserve support, they deserve exoneration, and they deserve compensation.
And in terms of the Horizon IT system that the Post Office had, it was Tony Blair who was the leader while that was signed off. No one is covering themselves in glory, particularly over this, have they, over the years?
Well, I think there are lessons for everybody to learn from this. So, you know, as somebody who hopes to become a minister if Labour wins the next general election, but ministers currently, and certainly in the past as well, the job of a minister should always be to ask questions. It should be to listen to dissenting voices and give them due credence to inform decision-making. It should not be that ministers are simply the mouthpiece for their officials or organisations like the Post Office, who quite clearly were covering things up.
You talked about the election. Keir Starmer told Sky yesterday that people want change, they must vote for Labour. What change do you think Labour represents?
Well, Labour represents the only hope for change that this country's got. I mean, if you look at what's going on at the moment, the big problem that people come to me about is the cost of living crisis. And the reason that's happening is we've had 25 different tax rises under this government as they've made working people pay for their disastrous crashing of the economy, which sent mortgages, prices in the shops, rents all soaring. The only way that we can get this country back to working for everybody who lives here again is to grow the economy. Labour has a plan for growth. You don't have to take my word for that. We've had captains of industry like the former chairman of Tesco saying there's only one player on the pitch when it comes to economic growth. But if we don't get that change, you're simply going to have this Conservative government continuing to do the same they've done for these past 14 years now. And if you ask people, do you feel better off or worse off after 14 years of Conservative government, people all feel far worse off.
The UK, as you say, currently has the highest tax burden in more than 70 years, but also crumbling public services. You say you want to bring taxes down, but how is it possible to do that and also fix public services?
What we don't want to do is be increasing the tax burden on working people in the way that we've seen this Conservative government do.
So how would you increase the tax burden?
There are a number of tax loopholes that Labour could close that would get us additional funding for some of those public services. I mean, one of the most egregious for me is the non-dom tax loophole. That's a system by which foreign billionaires who are living in this country get away with paying less tax than the guy that cuts my hair. That is simply unfair. By making those people pay their fair share of tax, you can raise £3 billion that would make a big impact on schools that are crying out for funding, on the National Health Service that is crying out for funding. That would help. But for the long term, we need to look at how we can grow the economy. And economic growth was 50% bigger on average every single year in the 13 years of Labour government that preceded these 13 years of Conservative government.
Hasn't Rishi Sunak, though, started to turn things around? We've seen interest rates start to fall from some of the mortgage companies. Inflation has fallen, as he said it would. Are you not worried that, you know, if the election's not for another 8-9 months, things economically might be feeling a little bit sunnier for a lot of people?
Well, if you look at what the government's doing right now, let's take tax, since that was something we were just discussing. The government is just playing cynical pre-election tricks. They're talking about a tax cut that comes into force this month. But what's really going on is we've had 25 different Tory tax hikes since they won the last general election in 2019. They're now proposing to give back just £2 out of every £10 extra they've taken off people. They're trying to pretend that that is some kind of benefit for people. Actually, people are far worse off. And the reason there's a cost of living crisis, the reason it's hitting people so hard, is this Conservative government crashed the economy and they decided to make working people pay the price. That is simply not fair.
Steve Reed, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's take a look at the papers this morning, and the Mail is leading with the Post Office scandal. It says pressure is growing on the government to compensate the thousands of sub-postmasters who were wrongly convicted as part of the Horizon IT scandal. Elsewhere, The Guardian claims a senior Conservative MP has warned his party faces obliteration at the next election. The Times warns that official government forecasts predict 2 million more people will be claiming disability benefits by the end of the decade. Meanwhile, The Telegraph says the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has bowed to rail unions by offering a bumper pay offer to avoid a week of strikes on the London Underground. And the Daily Star has a weather warning for us, saying a 12-day chill and whiteouts are on the way from Scandinavia. Well, let's just mop up some of the political reaction with our political correspondent, Rob Powell, on the sofa here with me. Rob, the Justice Secretary looking into how the government can help victims, the sub-postmasters.
Yeah, and you had Lord Arbuthnot, former Tory MP, Tory peer now, who's worked with a lot of these sub-postmasters on earlier, saying that what he wants to see is not so much the Post Office being stripped of its role in how these convictions are appealed, but something bigger than that, essentially Parliament legislating to en masse exonerate all the sub-postmasters that have still got convictions on their name. Now, Steve Reid from the Labour front bench there said that that would be constitutionally unusual, but I thought on the whole suggested Labour would be pretty open to supporting an idea.
It does sound,
like that.
doesn't it? Like I think they clearly think that this is a massive public issue, that people are really exercised about it. They're not going to push back on that, are they, if the government comes up with a plan?
And I think both sides want to show that something can be done quickly, because there has been so many sort of bureaucratic hurdles to get over, what with the inquiry and all of the court cases. If they can show that something can be done a little bit more quickly and get something for everyone in a shorter time frame, then I don't think anyone will necessarily stand in the way of that. Clearly, it's for government lawyers, the Justice Secretary and the Cabinet to hammer out practically how that would actually work. Then, of course, there is also some of the kind of looking back, if you like, to the coalition years, to ministers that were in post then, and whether enough was done back then. Lord Arbuthnot said that he wrote to all MPs, including David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, to ask if they'd seen any issues with this Post Office system that he had been seeing cropping up in his constituency. He said he didn't know if the issue made it to his desk in his capacity as Prime Minister, but interesting nonetheless that he says he wrote to the then Prime Minister, who is, of course, now the Foreign Secretary. Sir Ed Davey as well, the Lib Dem leader, was from 2010 for a couple of years the minister with responsibility for the Post Office as well. So I think you can expect some MPs to try and turn the heat up on him today as well.
OK, Rob, thanks very much. Now, Christopher Nolan's blockbuster biopic about the father of the atomic bomb took home the top gong at the Golden Globes overnight, and there were wins for the Oppenheimer director as well as his leading man, Cillian Murphy. But there was upset for fan favourite Barbie as Poor Things pipped it to the best comedy musical. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
And the Golden Globe goes to Barbie.
Pitched as the Battle of Barbenheimer, this year's Golden Globes dominated by two films that, when combined, made over $2 billion, while Barbie was recognised for its box office achievement.
Thank you. We would like to dedicate this to every single person on the planet who dressed up and went to the greatest place on earth, the movie theatres.
This was Christopher Nolan's night. His nuclear arms race thriller taking home Best Film, Best Director, as well as a win for its leading man.
First question, do I have lipstick all over my nose? I'm just going to leave it. I was in the hands of a visionary director, a master, and I want to thank Chris and Emma.
Amy, are you okay?
Yep. As for TV, while chaotic road rage thriller Beef and frenetic kitchen drama The Bear both went away with 3 Globes each. Perhaps more predictable, the cold-blooded power plays of the final season of Sky Atlantic's Succession sweeping the board, with wins for Sarah Snook.
This is really heavy.
Matthew McFadden.
I just adored every second playing the weird and wonderful human grease stain that is Tom Wamsgard.
And Kieran Culkin, rather fittingly lording it up over his rivals.
This is a nice moment. Suck it, Pedro. Sorry.
British showrunner Jesse Armstrong admitting it hadn't been an easy decision to end the series.
We decided this was the right time to end the show, and that was very bittersweet.
And the Golden Globe goes to Oppenheimer!
The first big awards event of the year, recognising the huge cultural impact of some of the most critically acclaimed drama we've seen in a long time. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Looks like a good night. Let's get a look now at the weather.
warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, it's going to be cold this week with a freshening breeze bringing a significant wind chill to southern parts of the country. This morning, there'll be a widespread frost. Overnight temperatures having dropped close to or below freezing. Patches of dense freezing fog over parts of Ireland, Scotland and northwestern England will be slow to clear. Some may linger throughout the day. Showers in the southeast will turn wintry over the high ground as they spread westward. For much of the country, it'll be a dry morning with variable amounts of cloud and some sunny spells. Temperatures will remain in low single figures, but it'll feel much colder in the windy south. Showers will reach central southern England by early evening. Overnight, the showers will clear southwestern areas to leave a largely dry night. There'll be another widespread frost with patchy fog likely over central and northern Scotland. Tomorrow, cloud over southern parts will clear from the east. Despite increased amounts of sunshine, it'll remain cold with temperatures reaching 4 or 5 degrees Celsius for most.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, if the chilly weather wasn't making you feel wintry enough, take a look at these. This image of autumn leaves resting on a snowy landscape has won the annual photographic competition run by the South Downs National Park. The shot is called Snow on Wolstonbury and was taken by Matt Goddard. The theme of this year's content was New Perspectives. You're watching Sky News Breakfast, still to come. The new year signals the start of what could be the most important months in Rishi Sunak's political career. But what did Jack and Sam make of it? They're going to join us next to discuss what's on their podcast.
Breakfast is becoming even brighter here on Sky News. There's a new studio, a new start time of 6 a.m. and some new faces.
OK, yes, we'll bring you all the top stories from around the globe.
And here in Westminster as we count down to an election.
Plus a look ahead to the stories that'll be making headlines on Sky News throughout the day.
That's your New Look Breakfast Show, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. here on Sky News.
So the Taliban government have been in power since 2021. And in that time, they have built bridges and built roads and infrastructure, and the country is coming to a point of peace. But they just don't recognize women. Women's education after the 6th grade doesn't exist. Women are not allowed to go to beauty parlors, which have been closed. There are parks are closed, they can't work for NGOs. And at this current day and age, that is unacceptable. That's 20 million Afghan women who are being treated as second-class citizens, and that's what I tried to highlight with my film. Well, Afghanistan has such a unique history in the sense that in my lifetime, the country's flag has changed 19 times. It's just a chaotic time of government after government, and every single time, the women have always been victims to all these new different regimes, and they've always been impacted, and it's just enough. There is no excuse for women not to be able to study. 3,000 Afghan women were meant to join the Afghan service as doctors, but the board examinations were cancelled and they are just at home doing nothing. As a country, we need stability and our economy to rise. We need all the help we can get. So it just doesn't make sense that this policy set forth by the Afghan government is in place. It's completely ridiculous. The world is at a time where there's just chaos and upsetting events happening everywhere, but at the same time, the Afghan women are being forgotten. And this is what I've tried to do with my film Yellow, and it's resonated so much around the world. I get messages every day from people who've seen it and feel that it's a message that needs to be told. Women are becoming invisible again. And as an Afghan myself, I can't let that happen. It's my duty as an artist and as a filmmaker to try to bring that to life.
Welcome back to Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories this morning. The first US lunar mission in more than 50 years is successfully launched in Florida, marking an important step towards commercial space travel. Hundreds of flood alerts are still in place across England, with yellow warnings for ice in the southeast and Northern Ireland. And ministers will meet this morning to consider how post office branch managers who were wrongly convicted of fraud can be cleared. Well, the first week back of term for MPs. It means there's another episode, of course, of politics at Jack and Sam's. What have the pair dug up in Westminster over the weekend? Nice to see you both. Thanks very much for coming in. So, Jack, to you first of all, we're gearing up for an election this year. What do you think the big themes are going to be?
Well, this is the week that politics sort of returns properly. All the MPs come back to Parliament this afternoon. Rishi Sunak has his first big political event of the year this morning up in Lancashire. And as you say, this is when all the framing is going to be about the election. We don't know when it's coming yet. Could be in May. More likely going to be towards the end of the year, as Rishi Sunak has suggested. And the themes are going to be, well, it depends which party you talk to. The Tories want to talk about tax. They want to talk about cutting tax. And they say Labour will raise your taxes. Labour want to talk about the NHS and the parlous state of the health service. And we'll hear those messages from the two leaders today, and probably tomorrow, and probably on Wednesday, and probably for the very many weeks and months to come.
But Sam, dominating the headlines today and dominating a lot of people's thoughts and conversations over the last few days has been what's happening with the postmasters scandal. And finally, it seems to have taken an ITV drama series to get politicians to actually do something about this, which has been rumbling away in the background for years and years.
Yeah, I sort of think that the post office scandal, and there's no doubt that it is an absolute scandal, has not only been bubbling along for years, but is an absolute testimony to sort of medium to long-term political failure, right? Here was a system that was wrong, the checks and balances didn't work, there were miscarriages of justice, there were suicides, and only many, many years later, as a result of the media, has it really come back? And, you know, I think there's a question about, is there enough urgency inside government about doing this? We understand there will be no announcements today about what's going to happen. We sort of know what the government are considering. They're considering maybe passing a law to which would simply exonerate those that were wrongly convicted. They're looking at taking away the powers of the post office to launch prosecutions. But I think there's a bigger point, Jane, which is, you know, this kind of thing happens when your political system isn't working very well. And I think it's hard to argue that over the last few years, the British political system has been working particularly well. This is the first probably normal-ish general election campaign we'll have had since 2015. Post the Brexit referendum, Britain has tumbled through all sorts of big moments and episodes of chaos. And that means that Downing Street's cabinet ministers have not been focused on things that they should have been. Does 2024 mark a sort of return to normality as far as we can manage? Well, that's one of the big questions of the year.
And Jack, in terms of Rishi Sunak, of course, he announced his 5 priorities in January last year. How would you say he's done on those as we start a new year and move on to an election year?
Yeah, it's almost exactly a year ago today that he made his first big speech of 2023, and he set out very clearly, these are the 5 things I want to focus on. The only one he put a time limit on was cutting inflation, and that is the thing that he would say has gone best. In fact, it definitely is the thing that's gone best. Inflation is now coming down even quicker, even than Downing Street had hoped it would. But I'm afraid on all of the other priorities that he set out, things are not going nearly so well. You know, cutting NHS waiting lists, that just hasn't happened. Sparking growth in the UK economy, that just hasn't happened. We're going to see GDP stats coming on Friday, which are going to show, at best, the UK economy is flat as a pancake. Immigration, he promised to stop the boats. He has reduced the number of boats coming across the channel, but he's far from stopped them. And in terms of getting debt falling, that feels like some way off as well. So, you know, he made big, bold promises. He said he would be judged on them. A year on, it's kind of 1 out of 5 so far.
And Sam, is tax going to be the primary battleground, do you think, during the election? We spoke to Labour about it a little earlier.
Well, as Jack was saying earlier, it will be if the Tories get their way, if they can convince people of their narrative, of their claims. Yes, on Saturday there was a 2p cut to people's national insurance, but as Labour point out, there has been a very big increase in people's personal taxes, the equivalent of 10p. So really, you're sort of net 8p down overall, they would argue. But there's also just a general question about whether tax is the biggest thing that people notice in their monthly finances, given that despite mortgage renewal rates coming down, that's still much more expensive. Energy costs still high. Inflation has come down, but we had a year of 8, 9, 10% inflation last year, and it's still going up. So can you sort of crunch that through? It strikes me there are always going to be three things in this election, of which tax and the economy is one. Another big one will be migration, and that's still a fight that particularly the Tory party need to have with itself, but Labour need to spell out more about what they would do. But also the NHS. And you've got... I think if you talk to Downing Street, they would concede that of the issues in their 5 priorities, the NHS is probably the trickiest with those waiting lists to deal with. But there's one solution I think they're not really looking at the moment. Let's hear about that. I've been talking to people in Downing Street, people next door in the Treasury, to other figures, and there's nobody, almost nobody in government, who thinks that the answer is a big further injection of cash into the NHS. Now, it had been a theory of Conservative politics that you need to neutralise the issue of the NHS by using the last few months up to an election, put a big dollop of cash in order to sort of neuter the Labour attack on the NHS. But that hasn't happened. Actually, Labour's commitments on the NHS and funding are much, much more measured this time compared to, say, what Jeremy Corbyn offered in 2019. And so there feels like this will be the first election in first election possibly in my lifetime, where there isn't a bit of cash arms race about the NHS.
Enormously enjoying the chinos there, by the way.
Thank you very much indeed. You have to look stylish in Jack's house. It's a little bit more free flow in my house. No, it's interesting on the NHS because I think the NHS probably depends on politicians wanting to give it more money in the run-up to an election. That's just been part of our electoral cycle. So if this election doesn't see that, I wonder what the impact is on our health service.
And of course, one of the other things coming up this week, the doctor strike, the current junior doctor strike, finally comes to end Tuesday morning. That's a 6-day strike of half the doctors in NHS England. That's a big, big impact on the health service. For a Prime Minister who is trying to get waiting lists down, in fact, who's promised to get waiting lists down, very, very hard to do that while you have this ongoing, very, very extreme industrial action. And there's no sign of that ending. This strike's coming to an end. I expect there'll be more.
Also a headache for the Prime Minister, Jack, on this vote in the Commons on drilling in the North Sea. We've already seen another resignation. That's right. A big piece of flagship government legislation about increasing the opportunities to drill for oil and gas in the North Sea. There's a big vote happening in the House of Commons this evening. There are some very unhappy Tory MPs about it. Tory MPs who think that green issues are the most important things facing the planet, do not think we should be further exploring the North Sea for more oil and gas. And yeah, Chris Skidmore, who was the Prime Minister's advisor on green issues, resigned as an MP on Friday, or announced he would do so. The Prime Minister's COP envoy, Alok Sharma, also spoke out very strongly against it on Saturday. So although he'll win the vote tonight, I'm sure, it's not a good look for Rishi Sunak to have these big, high-profile Tory politicians attacking his key policies. And Sam, Foreign Affairs also big today. David Cameron in front of the Commons Select Committee.
That's right. And I know it's a long way away. I know it's kind of doesn't always feel relevant, but there's a huge decision for Britain about what happens in the Red Sea, because all our trade depends on these key shipping routes, some of which go up through the Red Sea next to Yemen, where these Houthi rebels are launching attacks on container ships. Now, they say they're doing it because they want to stop ships reaching Israel. This is about what's going on in the Middle East, in Israel with Hamas and in Gaza. But it's also having a massive impact on the basic trade flows. And every time one of those ships that would have gone up through the Red Sea goes round the bottom of South Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, that adds £1 million to the cost of that of that cargo being transported, and takes 20 extra days. That has an impact on things like inflation. and our trade and our ability to source goods. And I think that the government is worried. The big decision is whether or not to follow America and start launching missiles. We've got ships in the region. We could, Downing Street have now got to decide whether we will.
So potentially a massive escalation is on the horizon. Finally, before we let you go, Jack, the Prime Minister said last week that he was looking towards the end of the year for an election. I mean, in your head, have you ruled out April, May?
More or less. Me and Sam don't necessarily agree on this, but I just think the Prime Minister is so far behind in the polls. He hasn't been in Downing Street very long. He will want to cling on as long as humanly possible, and he'll just pray that something turns up. You know, we've seen it before the last few years. Big events can suddenly happen and things can change. So my working assumption has always been he will hang on as long as he can, which means probably an election at the end of November.
I mean, it's more likely than not.
What do you think?
Definitely more likely than not it'll be in November. But that does presuppose that Rishi Sunak keeps control of when you call an election. As we saw from 2023, there are just so many imponderables, not least with the Conservative Party. I think signs that rebellion on the Rwanda bill is decreasing, but you've never been able to say that it's a happy party after the events of the last 3-4 years. So his timing probably relies on waiting a bit longer, hoping the economy improves, and seeing if something bluntly just comes along to improve his fortunes. But who can say that the Conservative Party will let him do that?
OK. Jack Blanchard, Sam Coates, thank you both very much. And if you want to listen to Jack and Sam's podcast, you can scan the QR code on your screen right now. There they are in their fetching off-air podcast clothes also. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast.
And liftoff of the first United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket, launching a new era.
The Peregrine Mission 1 blasts into space. Its destination, the surface of the moon. We'll have more on the successful lunar launch next.
Morning, everybody. It is 8 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us on Sky News wherever you're watching us. Chancellor will be joining us in just a few moments' time.
Evidence of the cost of living crisis. And we'll start with breaking news. There's only one place to start this morning against the dollar ever.
It was like night fell.
It's 5 o'clock. This is the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes.
Welcome to the Politics Hub
on the UK Tonight throughout the course of the week. Still to come.
This is a piece of hardware built at the Open University in Milton Keynes. It's called a mass spectrometer, but what that is a device that will land on the surface of the moon on this mission, and it will measure the composition of the lunar atmosphere, very, very thin lunar atmosphere, less than a millionth of the thickness of the atmosphere on Earth. And it will basically, it acts like a weighing scales. So it separates the atmospheric molecules according to how heavy they are, and we know that water molecules weigh 18, nitrogen weighs 28, so we can identify what those molecules are. When we did land on the moon, we put humans on there, and the initial idea was that the moon was quite dry. It seemed to be a dry, barren, dusty place. But more recently, in the last 10 years or so, we've had orbiters going around the moon, which is starting to reveal a different picture, and we're getting suggestions that there's actually a very tenuous water cycle going on the moon with kind of water molecules moving around the surface, maybe getting stuck at the poles and frozen down as ice where it's very, very cold. And also techniques have improved. So the last time an instrument like this went to the moon was 50 years ago. Technology moves on. So, this mission is the first time to go and do this kind of science again after 50 years. I mean, the moon is it's getting to be a busy place with missions. As you've probably seen on your coverage. What's different about this mission is that it's commercially led. So it's kind of there's a global feeling that the best way to explore space, and the moon is the nearest place to go. So this is where you're going to go and try this out in the first place, is to get everybody involved. So it's not just a kind of a national agency endeavour, but it's involving commercial companies and universities and trying to bring that all together to make it a more sustainable and a cheaper way to explore. One of the reasons people are really interested in water on the moon is that it might help sustain exploration there. So if we want to put astronauts on the moon, if we want to take a bottle of water up to them, which weighs, half a kilogram for a bottle of water, it's going to take about £500,000 to do that because of lifting it through the Earth's gravity field. So one of the ideas is that if you can find appreciable quantity of water on the moon and purify it, bottle it, sell it for less than £500,000, then you've got a business case. Now, that's not my bag, but you can see how using resources locally and not having to take everything with you in a massive spacecraft can make space exploration more agile.
Now, the missing door that blew off an Alaskan Airlines flight in midair has been found by a schoolteacher in his garden. Let's talk to Sabah Chowdhury, who's got more on this. Sabah, I'm smiling, but, you know, this is a really serious story for those on this plane, an absolutely terrifying experience, but they have at least found the door.
Yeah, so the incident took place on Friday last week, just minutes after the aircraft left Portland International Airport. So the pilots on board were forced to perform an emergency landing. It was the Boeing 737 plane and an Alaska Airlines flight. And like I say, they were forced to perform an emergency landing on that plane after a massive hole tore through the side of that aircraft. Absolutely terrifying, I'm sure, a terrifying ordeal for passengers. But luckily, no one was seriously hurt, and also the pilots were able to skillfully land the plane in a safe and secure way. Now, this was a lucky escape, really, for the 171 passengers on board that plane and also the 6 members of the cabin crew. But it really could have been so much worse, not just for them, but also the people on the ground because of inevitable debris that would have fallen from that plane. And it just so happens that one piece of debris, so a door plug from the missing door, was found in the garden of an American teacher in Portland, a man called Bob, in his garden of all places. Now, without a doubt, this piece of debris will be used in the ongoing investigation to determine what exactly happened on the Boeing 737 MAX 9 plane last week, because at the moment, the cause is still unknown. Now, this, without a doubt, is, you know, a huge cause of concern for regular flyers. The damage, arguably, is done. This is not the first time we are seeing a reported incident with these planes. This is, in fact, the 4th in a matter of 2 months. And also, optics, 197 of these planes have been temporarily grounded while the investigations are taking place. So, a worrying time indeed for regular passengers.
OK, Sabah, thanks very much. Now, at exactly 18 minutes past 7 this morning, the US successfully launched its first rocket to the moon since the Apollo missions more than 50 years ago.
Two good SRBs, hitting peak pressure on the SRBs.
Well, joining me is space journalist Kate Arkless-Gray. Kate, lovely to see you. So why is this mission exciting?
There are so many reasons that this is an exciting mission. Firstly, it was the first time this particular rocket had ever launched, and it went off very smoothly. There'll be a lot of very relieved people at the United Launch Alliance who are potentially going to go out of business if this had failed. It's also potentially the first commercial lunar landing that's being taken to the moon. It's Astrobotic, is an American company from Pittsburgh, which is not the usual place that you would imagine for a space company. Usually you'd think Houston or Florida for a space company. But as you were saying, it will be the first time that America has soft landed on the moon since 1972, which is when the Apollo 17 landing happened. So it's a very exciting time for them.
I mean, has it got over the tricky bit? It's launched successfully, but there are other tricky bits to come, aren't there, before it successfully lands?
Absolutely. Landing on the moon is not easy in any way. In fact, in just the last, since 2019, there have been 4 failed lunar missions. A couple of those did start out, much like Astrobotic, as competitors in the Google Lunar X Prize, which offered a big prize pool, about $30 million, to try and land a commercial mission on the moon. Nobody won that prize. A few of the teams did try still to get their missions out there, but the Japanese and the Israeli mission both failed by, they crashed into the moon. And just last year, a few days before India successfully landed on the moon, the Russian lunar mission, as they said in their press release, ceased to exist after a collision with the lunar surface.
So in terms of what it's carrying on board, tell us a little bit about the kind of stuff that's on there.
So this mission has got a real wide range of things on it. For NASA, the important thing is they've got 5 payloads that are under the Commercial Lunar Delivery Services program. And they're doing things, they've got scientific experiments to check out radiation, to analyse the lunar soil, see how hydrated that is. They'll also be looking at the exosphere of the moon and trying to find out how much water there might be on the moon. But there are also these commercial payloads. So they've got 16 customers from 7 different countries, and it's anything from archives and artworks and humanities projects through to some human remains. There's an actual Bitcoin, a physical Bitcoin is being sent up there by the Seychelles. I'm not sure why they decided that would be their first thing to land.
The point of Bitcoins was that they weren't physical.
Well, indeed, but they have produced a unique physical coin onto which is loaded a real Bitcoin.
Why send DNA up there? Why send human remains up there?
Well, that's it's an interesting one. For one side of it, you've got sending DNA is part of a kind of archive of human, what humans are, and much like the Voyager gold disc had information about humanity. But on the other side, on the commercial side, there are services. There are 2 companies offering services for space memorials, where they'll send like a proportion of your remains or DNA or messages up and into space. Actually, the Navajo Nation in the US have been a little bit upset about the idea of putting human remains on the moon, because they don't feel that that's respectful of the moon.
And in terms of the possibility of people going to the moon, I suppose that's what a lot of people would be really interested in, and the idea that, we could see man or woman walking on the moon again quite soon. Does this mission bring us closer to that becoming a reality?
Yes, absolutely. There are some radiation detectors on this mission, and that's all there to help us work out what sort of radiation that astronauts would be subject to on the journey to and on the surface of the moon. And we're hoping that later this year we'll see the Artemis 2 mission, which will send humans around the moon. They won't land on it, not yet, but it will be the first time that a woman will have gone around the moon.
Fantastic stuff. Well, we'll keep an eye on it and all of the next stages. Is the 23rd of February it's going to land? Is that the date?
That's what we're hoping for. There are also, to watch out for, in January, there's a Japanese mission that might be landing on the moon, and there should be a second American mission, if it launches in mid-February, that should be landing around the same time as Astrobotic.
OK, we shall wait and see which one gets there first. Kate Douglas-Gray, space journalist, good to talk to you. Thanks very much. Well, let's take a look at the morning's sports news now. And Liverpool are through to the 4th round of the FA Cup. They beat Arsenal 2-0 yesterday. After dominating the first half, Arsenal fell behind late in the second half. Trent Alexander-Arnold's free kick headed into his own goal by Arsenal defender Jakub Kiwior. And then deep into stoppage time, Liverpool broke away to make it 2-0. Luis Diaz scoring to seal the win. The result means it's now 3 consecutive defeats for Mikel Arteta's side, and they're without a win in 4. FA Cup holders Manchester City booked their place in the 4th round in emphatic style. Pep Guardiola's side thrashed Huddersfield 5-0, with 2 goals coming from England midfielder Phil Foden. And Chelsea striker Sam Kerr is set to miss the rest of the season after picking up a serious knee injury in training. Well, let's see how the back pages are shaping up this morning. Wham bam, says The Sun, after Patrick Bamford's stunner during Leeds' 3-0 FA Cup victory over Peterborough. The Eye has Luis Diaz celebrating Liverpool's win away at Arsenal despite their defeat. The misfiring Gunners may not be shopping for a new striker, though, it says, after all. The Times also features Arsenal's FA Cup exit with a quote from Mikel Arteta, "We must get our heads right." Feet right too are also important. Time for the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Conditions will be quiet and cold this week, with a freshening breeze bringing a significant wind chill to southern parts of the country. This morning, there'll be a widespread frost overnight, temperatures having dropped close to or below freezing. Patches of dense, freezing fog over parts of Ireland, Scotland and northwestern England will be slow to clear. Some may linger throughout the day. Showers in the southeast will turn wintry over the high ground as they spread westward. For much of the country, it's going to be a dry morning.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up on Sky News Breakfast, after the floods comes the freeze. Warnings still in place for a lot of wet weather, but the Met Office says it is snow, which could potentially cause yet more chaos to come. Time to wrap up warm. Hello everyone, it's 9 o'clock. If you're going out this morning, even us northerners might need our big coats. After a week of storms, torrential rains and floods, get ready for the big chill. We're told that there is snow coming. But the weather was good in Florida, good enough in fact, to launch a rocket to the moon. It's Monday, the 8th of January.
And liftoff of the first United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket, launching a new era in spaceflight to the moon and beyond.
The first US lunar mission in more than 50 years lifts off from Cape Canaveral. Hundreds of flood warnings are still in place, and the Met Office says that snow could cause rush hour chaos across the southeast.
An amber warning for cold weather, a yellow warning for ice, and all this comes just days after flooded communities.
Also ahead, ministers meet this morning to consider how Post Office branch officers who were the victims of a miscarriage of justice can be cleared. The door that blew off an Alaska Airlines jet in mid-air is found by a school teacher.
And the Golden Globe goes to Oppenheimer!
Christopher Nolan's blockbuster about the father of the atomic bomb wins big at the Golden Globes. Thanks so much for joining us while Rob and Steph are here with the headlines politically. Rob?
Yeah, morning, Jane. I think the Post Office story is probably going to dominate the first day back at term for MPs today. We'll have a meeting involving the Justice Secretary, calls for there to be legislation passed to basically set aside en masse these wrongful convictions that many sub-postmasters were subject to. Awkward questions potentially as well for those who were ministers back in the coalition years, including one Ed Davey, the current leader of the Lib Dems.
And Steph, it's flipping chilly out there, isn't it?
Really rather brisk, yes. And down in the southeast, we've also got a keen wind to make that feels-like temperature that little bit lower than it might be. And there's also the chance of seeing a little bit of snow, but not many people will see it. We'll find out exactly where later.
OK, thank you both so much. But first, at exactly 18 minutes past 7 this morning, the US launched its first rocket to the moon since the Apollo missions more than 50 years ago. Well, our science correspondent Thomas Moore was watching the footage, watching this had happened live. Thomas, tell us why is this important and why has it taken 50 years?
Yeah, look, I mean, this looks like a pretty regular space launch. We're used to seeing these now, but this is anything but. NASA wasn't at the controls. It has a ticket to ride. It's got 5 experiments on board, but it has commissioned a private American startup to develop not just this rocket, but also the Lunar lander, which sits in the nose cone at the moment and will be heading towards the moon to land, they hope, on February the 23rd. Now, why do they want to go back to the moon? Well, it's all about water, because we know that the Americans have got ambitions to send humans back there. They hope that water will obviously hydrate astronauts, but also provide their oxygen and perhaps even rocket fuel to go further into the solar system. That's why you're seeing this revival of the space race, the moon race. But it is commercial companies in charge this time because NASA hopes that will bring down the costs to really deliver value for money and make regular lunar missions much more practical. But it does mean that this commercial company is not only taking science experiments, but it's also taking other commercial payloads, including the ashes and DNA from human beings, which has really angered some indigenous Americans who feel that the moon is a sacred place. But also there is a marketing stunt by a sports drink manufacturer that is sending up a can of its drink in a powdered form so that future astronauts can mix it with lunar water and enjoy. Now, this is perhaps a new way of thinking about the moon, and many people are unhappy.
Thomas, thanks very much. Well, so the weather here on land in the UK now, and after the floods comes the freeze. Over the past week, we've seen storms and torrential rain cause rivers to burst their banks from Gloucestershire to Nottinghamshire. The Environment Agency says that more than 1,800 properties have been flooded and communities are still mopping up.
It has happened before, but it's all been thoroughly repaired and tanked since then. We were not expecting it because we had a lot of work done on it and we've had it all checked and maintained. It's just, although it's not high, nevertheless it's getting everything wet and it's seeping in as if it's got under the floor.
So Bullstick Stream goes right up into our yard. There's a kind of towpath that we walk behind there. Usually that's, of course, completely underwater now. The flood waters came up very quickly. Since Friday, they've been stable, but it's right up to our back patio, almost to our back door. We have a neighborhood WhatsApp group, and I've never seen it this active in the 3 years we've moved here. Some of our neighbors are dealing with a little bit of flooding in their kitchen. We've been pretty stressed out. On Friday, as I said, it's stabilized since Friday. Right now we're okay, kind of hoping for the best.
Well, in England, there are now 152 flood warnings and 152 flood alerts in place. But attention is already turning to what is coming next. That is snow, ice and freezing temperatures. Well, let's cross live to our West of England and Wales correspondent Dan Whitehead, who's in Longford in Gloucestershire. And Dan, clearly it's been enormously wet there. They could do without freezing temperatures on top, couldn't they?
Yeah, they really could. The flood waters in Longford have receded from the houses now. A street cleaning team just drove past, cleaning up some of the debris. But you can see behind me that there is still plenty of low-lying flood water in the surrounding areas here in Gloucester and in communities right across sort of the middle and southern England that were impacted last week following those storms, and they saw their properties flooded. What they now are facing is a week of freezing weather, which could make the conditions even more difficult for them. The Met Office and the UK Health Security Agency at the weekend issued this amber alert for cold weather. Essentially, that is in place until midday on Friday, not only here in the southwest of England, but also in the northwest, the West Midlands and the East Midlands. And what that means is it could put stresses for a significant period of time on health services. So the advice is to check on elderly people, vulnerable people, and actually that amber alert means that it could be particularly difficult for some to keep their properties warm, which is classed as 18 degrees and above, and it could be difficult for them to do so. So check in on those vulnerable people. But we've had another warning this morning from the Met Office itself, and that is a yellow weather warning, this time for ice specifically. That actually affects London, it affects the southeast, and it also affects parts of Northern Ireland. So a difficult week ahead, and it comes, as you say, as there are still around 150 flood warnings and alerts in place. There are still high river levels, as you can see. So the concern is that low-lying water in those communities that are still facing floods and are still mopping up, that could turn to ice, creating more dangerous conditions.
OK, Dan, thanks very much. Well, let's bring in Steph in the studio here. So, Steph, how cold is it going to get?
Well, it got down to minus 7.5 last night, so really quite chilly, and it's going to stay cold for most of the week and into the weekend as well. There's slight differences on exactly where the high pressure is going to be, and that will direct the wind towards us from slightly different places, which will bring us slightly different temperature of air and that sort of thing. So there's slight discrepancies, but essentially really cold in the southeast for today and tomorrow, and then slightly less cold, more cloud around. But if you're thinking of a winter wonderland, Jane, get that out your head. It's not going to be snow for everybody. We've all got the cold weather, yes, but not the snow. The snow
kids
warning...
want to know, are they going to get days off school?
No. In the southeast, where we've got the snow warning at the moment, it's for ice, really, but there could be some snow there as well. There are some showers currently. They are of rain rather than snow at the moment, but that could change. But what's happening is the winds are sort of channeling together, so they're funneling these clouds and the showers into a long line, and that's why we could end up with, like, one patch, just having these showers trail over them, and they could have 1 to 3 centimetres of snow, where about a mile down the road they'll see nothing. That's why it's so regionalised, this snow. We're not all going to see it, Jane.
OK. Thanks for clearing that up, Steph. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines now. And Ukrainian authorities say at least 2 people have been killed after Russia launched a large-scale missile attack in the early hours of the morning. Military officials say the capital, Kiev, is under threat from ballistic missiles and have urged people to find shelter. They say areas including Zaporizhia and Kharkiv are also under attack. A shopping centre and 24 other buildings were damaged in the city of Kryvyi. A new national drive to get pupils back into the classroom is being launched today. The Department for Education is promising 18 new attendance hubs across 6 regions in England, bringing the total to 32. It says it'll help nearly 2,000 schools tackle persistent absences. New research has found the UK is the only country in the G7 where household budgets have not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. The TUC claim families would be £750 a year better off if incomes had grown in line with other leading economies. Now, ministers will meet today to consider how to clear the names of hundreds of post office branch managers who were wrongly convicted of fraud. The Horizon IT system was introduced by the Post Office in 1999. Almost immediately, losses in the system emerged, with the Post Office taking legal action. By 2015, 736 people had been criminally prosecuted, with 700 convicted. A public inquiry into the scandal was established in 2020. To date, 93 convictions have been overturned, with around £138 million paid in compensation. A little earlier, the Conservative peer, Lord Arbuthnot, told us that postmasters had been failed by every section of society and that Parliament should step in to overturn their convictions.
900 convictions of sub-postmasters, and only 93 of those convictions have been overturned. That's an awfully small, pathetically small number. And I think that this is a mass problem which has got to be dealt with in a mass way. And I think that Parliament has got to step in and say that post office convictions are not safe. We've seen the way that investigators behaved, and they behaved in a way which was contrary to the rule of law. And these convictions have got to be set aside.
Well, our political correspondent Rob Powell has more on this. Rob, the Justice Secretary, looking into how the government can help these victims.
Yeah, Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, will meet with the business minister who's responsible for the Post Office now, Kevin Hollinrake. That meeting will take place later today. A number of options being considered. One of them, how to strip the Post Office out of the process by which people that were wrongfully convicted can appeal those convictions. I think it's clear, though, listening to people like Lord Arbuthnot, who was heavily involved in this campaign when he was an MP in Hampshire many years ago, that actually there is a desire among some, and certainly among campaigners, for a kind of more widespread solution, possibly even legislation passed by Parliament that would set aside all of these wrongful convictions en masse, so all of the individuals don't have to go through this legal process individually and take the time to do that, something that could be done in a much more widespread fashion. Now, you had Labour frontbencher Steve Reid on a little bit earlier, and he, I thought, gave the impression that Labour wouldn't necessarily stand in the way of that. Have a listen to what he said.
I completely agree that those individuals who have still got convictions for crimes for which they were not responsible need to be exonerated. As I understand it, the Justice Secretary is looking at whether there's a legislative route for this to be done through Parliament, rather than expecting either the public inquiry to do it piecemeal or each of those individuals to have to go to court one by one to seek exoneration and their conviction being overturned. We will look at what the government brings forward. Constitutionally, it's very unusual to do it that way, but I think the gravity of the crisis and the level of the injustice does mean that we have to look at doing something to support these people.
Things taking place today in government. I don't think we necessarily should expect any formal announcement on what the government plans to do today. There may be an attempt by backbenchers, though, to bring a minister to the Commons to answer questions on this. I think a lot of concern that's been raised since that drama was aired last week. Maybe also focus on how ministers acted when some of these concerns were initially raised during the Cameron-led coalition years. Sir Ed Davey, now the Lib Dem leader, was a business minister back then. A lot of focus has been put on how his communications with one of the lead campaigners from the sub-postmaster group. And a lot of people pointing out that Sir Ed Davey is someone who is rather fond of calling for other people to resign and be held to account for indiscretions and failings. And I think for that reason, they will probably want to subject him to a little bit of heat today as well.
OK, Rob, thanks a lot. Now, Al Jazeera has accused Israel of deliberately targeting journalists after 2 of its staff were killed in an airstrike near Rafah in southern Gaza. Well, our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle is in Jerusalem. Alistair, tell us about what happened and what kind of reaction there's been from Israel.
Well, this airstrike happened on a car that was very deep into the south of the Gaza Strip. Al Jazeera said that the 3 men were working for the network, but the IDF, when asked about it last night, said that at least one of them was using an aerial object, we think a drone, and that it was posing a threat to Israeli forces, and so they fired on the vehicle, killing 2 journalists inside, including one of the sons of Wael al-Dadu, who is the bureau chief for Al Jazeera in Gaza. Now, he's already lost his wife, 2 of his other children, and 1 of his grandchildren in a previous airstrike, so he's paid a very heavy toll during this conflict. He's become something of the face of the news in the Arab world, because of course it is only Palestinian journalists who can operate in Gaza at the moment freely. We as international journalists cannot get in, so we rely on our Palestinian colleagues in the Gaza Strip to provide us with imagery and interviews from there, and they do so under great risk, as was demonstrated yesterday when these 2 journalists were killed. Al Jazeera have very strongly condemned the killing, but they are at odds with the IDF, who claim that it was because there was some sort of threat posed to Israeli forces. But there are reports that these journalists could have been using drones in order just to film the scene rather than trying to attack any Israeli soldiers. But now at least 79 journalists have been killed in Gaza since the war began just over 3 months ago.
Alistair, thanks very much. The missing doll that blew off an Alaskan Airlines flight in mid-air has been found by a schoolteacher in his garden. Well, Saba Chowdhury has more on this. Saba, just remind us what happened here. It was a terrifying incident for passengers.
Yes, the incident took place on Friday just last week, and it happened minutes after takeoff from Portland International Airport. Pilots on board the Boeing 737 aircraft and Alaska Airlines flight were forced to perform an emergency landing after a massive hole ripped into the side of the plane. Now, luckily, no one was seriously hurt and the plane landed safely, but it could have been so much worse, not just for those 171 passengers on the plane or the 6 members of the cabin crew, but also for people on the ground because of inevitable debris. Now, it just so happens that a piece of debris was today found in the garden of an American teacher, an individual called Bob, and this was the missing door plug from the door. Just we can see the gap in the picture there. Now, we can determine that this piece of debris will be used in the ongoing investigations to determine what exactly happened on the Boeing 737 aircraft, because at this moment in time, it's not known. The cause of the incident is not yet known, and it's going to cause a lot of concern for regular passengers. About 197 of these planes currently have been suspended. They're on the ground. They're not going anywhere. And also, this isn't the first time that we're seeing an incident of this nature with the Boeing 737. This is, in fact, the 4th time in a matter of just 2 months that there has been a reported issue. So this most recent incident will likely add to the anxiety amongst those regular passengers.
Saba, thanks a lot. Coming up on Sky News Breakfast, I'm going to be joined by the Conservative MP David Davis, who's calling on the government to do more to hold accountable those responsible for the Post Office scandal.
Breakfast is becoming even brighter here on Sky News. There's a new studio, a new start time of 6 a.m. and some new faces.
OK, yes, we'll bring you all the top stories from around the globe.
And here in Westminster as we count down to an election.
Plus a look ahead to the stories that'll be making headlines on Sky News throughout the day.
That's your new look breakfast show, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. here on Sky News.
So the Taliban government have been in power since 2021, and in that time, they have built bridges and built roads and infrastructure, and the country is coming to a point of peace. But they just don't recognize women. women's education after the 6th grade doesn't exist. Women are not allowed to go to beauty parlors, which have been closed. There are parks are closed, they can't work for NGOs. And at this current day and age, that is unacceptable. That's 20 million Afghan women who are being treated as second-class citizens, and that's what I tried to highlight with my film. Well, Afghanistan has such a unique history in the sense that in my lifetime, the country's flag has changed 19 times. It's just a chaotic time of government after government, and every single time, the women have always been victims to all these new different regimes, and they've always been impacted, and it's just enough. There is no excuse for women not to be able to study. 3,000 Afghan women were meant to join the Afghan service as doctors, but the board examinations were cancelled and they are just at home doing nothing. As a country, we need stability and our economy to rise. We need all the help we can get. So it just doesn't make sense that this policy set forth by the Afghan government is in place. It's completely ridiculous. The world is at a time where there's just chaos and upsetting events happening everywhere, but at the same time, the Afghan women are being forgotten. And this is what I've tried to do with my film Yellow, and it's resonated so much around the world. I get messages every day from people who've seen it and feel that it's a message that needs to be told. Women are becoming invisible again. And as an Afghan myself, I can't let that happen. It's my duty as an artist and as a filmmaker to try to bring that to life.
Welcome back. Well, ministers will meet this morning to consider how to clear the names of hundreds of post office branch managers who were wrongly convicted of fraud. Well, one of those leading the calls to make sure that the right people are held responsible is the Conservative MP, David Davis. He joins me in the studio now. The Prime Minister said he's considering exonerating all victims of the post office scandal. It's going to be a tricky thing to get through legally.
Yes.
Are you confident it could happen?
Oh, I think it can be done, and I think it will get done. I mean,
how quickly, though?
Well, it's got to be months, not years, put it that way. I mean, at the moment, if we carry on at the current pace, it'll be years, because we've got, 10% of them cleared so far? And one of the reasons for that is because the authorities have challenged every appeal. Well, what are they doing, So that's the first thing, to stop that process. But I think, there is a single fact that underpins every single case, and that is that the Post Office lied about who had access to those accounts, who had access to those computers. That fact makes every single conviction, well, technically unsafe, just wrong, And I think we can use that fact to turn them all over. That's what we should be doing.
Why has it taken so long to get to this point, do you think?
Well, I mean, you've got the problem of the exoneration, you've got the problem on compensation and so on. And this is because the bodies involved are still resisting. I mean, the Post Office is still, although it says publicly it accepts there's been a massive injustice, in the way it behaves, employs expensive lawyers to challenge all the compensation claims. As I say, I think it's the Post Office authorities who are actually challenging the cases when they come to appeal. We've got to stop that. The state, the government, is the single shareholder for the Post Office, and we should be giving them a very simple instruction, start behaving properly.
The managers responsible for this, do you know who they are, and do you think they should be prosecuted?
Well, I've got a good idea, but I don't want to replace one injustice with another one. I think there should be a proper investigation, a criminal investigation, and it should encompass the behaviour of the Post Office and of Fujitsu, and see who lied. Basically, that's what it comes down to. It's simply who lied, who made the decisions to say, for example, that there was no access to the post office computers, individual post office computers. Who made that decision? Somebody must have done. You know, they represented that case in court, as it were, as well. So once we identify who lied, not who made a mistake, but who lied, those are the people who should face criminal charges.
What about Paula Bennells? Of course, she was the chief executive of the Post Office 2012 to 2019. A petition calling for her to be stripped of her CV has now reached over 1 million signatures. Do you think she should face personal sanctions?
Well, again, the investigation's got to do that. I mean, look, if I were her, I'd have given up my CBE. I would have given it back, you know. But if that's going to happen, it's got to be a proper process. As I say, don't replace one injustice with another one. I think the odds are she'll lose it. The forfeiture committee will no doubt look at it at some point. There's a special committee to look at these things, and they know what to look at. You know, whether or not she misrepresented, whether or not she allowed miscarriages to go on. You know, so that will happen, I'm pretty sure, but it's got to be done properly.
What changes would you like to see at the Post Office generally? Well,
for a start, we should take away from them the right to police themselves. You know, I mean, you shouldn't be in the business of marking your own homework, even if you're a state body. I think, you know, because were a state body, they were given their own police force, and we can see from what's happened, we can see from that docudrama precisely how badly that worked. That ended up oppressing people, of convicting them of things they never did. You know, so that's got to go. That's got to go straight away. Beyond that, I mean, in more immediate terms, we've got to get them exonerated. And we've got to get the compensation programme accelerated, because at the moment it's being bogged down by the Post Office itself. So all of those things got to be done, and then we'll get a glimmer of justice at the end of this.
Are there any other public bodies, like the Post Office, that have the capabilities to carry out these private prosecutions?
There are some others. I don't have the list in my mind at the moment, but there are some others. But
should questions be raised about all of those also?
Yes, indeed. Exactly right. I think, you know, at some point we're going to have to do some legislation to change that, because, you know, we're going to have to take the police force, as it were, away from the Post Office and put it somewhere else, the Met or some other police agency, probably. And when we do that, we should go down the list. I mean, one of the problems here, which this characterises, I'm afraid, is that not just big state bodies, but big bureaucracies are very, very bad at handling issues of justice. We saw it as well with the tainted blood scandal, how long that took to get resolved. We've seen it with things like the Chinook crash, where the RAF fought off for 10 years, attempts to exonerate the pilots. This is a generic problem, and we've got to find a better way of dealing with it.
David Davis, Conservative MP. Good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Right, let's get a look at the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, conditions really cold this week, with a freshening breeze bringing a significant wind chill to southern parts of the country. This morning, there'll be a widespread frost, overnight temperatures having dropped close to or below freezing. Patches of dense freezing fog over parts of Ireland, Scotland and northwestern England will be slow to clear. Some may linger throughout the day. Showers in the southeast will turn wintry over the high ground as they spread westward. For much of the country, it'll be a dry morning with variable amounts of cloud.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up on Sky News Breakfast, success for Succession even, put my teeth back in, but who came out top in the Battle of Barbenheimer at the Golden Globes? Plus, as MPs return to Westminster, I'll be joined by Katie Balls, political editor at The Spectator, and Ian Dunt, columnist at The Eye, to discuss what will be a very busy year in politics. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories this morning. The first US lunar mission in more than 50 years has successfully launched in Florida, marking an important step towards commercial space travel. Hundreds of flood alerts are still in place across England, with yellow warnings for ice in the south, east and Northern Ireland. And ministers will meet this morning to consider how post office branch managers who are wrongly convicted of fraud can be cleared. Well, MPs are back in Westminster today after the New Year break, and the next few months are likely to be crucially important as the country gears up for a general election. I'm joined now by Katie Balls, political editor at The Spectator, and Ian Dunn, columnist for The Eye. And Katie, to you first of all, I mean, first day back, there's lots to discuss, but do you think the post office scandal is going to be the thing that dominates the first few days?
I think it is, in the sense that both parties really pushing for movement on this. Obviously, you could say better late than never if you think about how that ITV drama has brought this sense of urgency for something that really dates back to the 90s, has been bubbling away since then. Questions, I think, for the Tories, for the government in terms of what they'll do. Questions for Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, his role in the coalition at the time. And I think Labour wanting to make the most of that and appear as though they are on the side of, those who want to see some form of justice. So how far can the Tories go, and will they get cross-party backing, which is a possibility, or does it become point scoring?
I mean, Ian, talking to Lord Arbuthnot earlier, who's been involved in this from the very beginning, I mean, he makes the point that MPs have let down the sub-postmasters. They've been let down by pretty much every sector of society. It's all well and good the Prime Minister saying it's an appalling miscarriage of justice, but the politicians should have done more, shouldn't they?
Yes. I think journalists could take a little bit of the blame as well, actually. We're not great on these. When something really...
The story hasn't been covered, though.
No, the story has been covered, and also questions...
documentaries about it,
right,
all the channels
and questions have been asked in the Commons as well, so you can obviously find individual cases. We're talking about as a group, how much ferocity of attention was there. And usually when you get these cases, they can be... they can seem sort of instinctively kind of boring, in the same way that building regulation might seem kind of boring before Grenfell. And yet, when something kicks off, once the emotions about it are suddenly brought up, questions are raised by why we're not discussing these things in a more ferocious manner. Nevertheless, generally as a political culture, we're quite bad at looking at issues like this, and we're quite good at looking at personalities and skullduggery and sort of, court intrigue around politics, less good on the policy.
The heartbreak of little people's lives, in inverted commas, isn't it? It just doesn't perhaps make as good telly as good journalism.
Well, I think that's perhaps why it has come to the point that it's a dramatisation that has suddenly meant people do feel that, attachment to the story, which means it's now getting that focus. Because, as you say, there has been lots of great journalism on this topic. It just hasn't taken off in that way. So you can say better late than never. I think for some who have been affected by this, it's going to feel a lot too late. Yeah. But there is a chance still to, do some good things here.
Yeah. So 2024, an election year, Ian. We've already had the party leaders out on the rounds, doing the interviews, out meeting the public already, fast out the traps. How do you see the year playing out?
I think Sunak is entirely correct when he says that it's going to be happening in the autumn. There was a lot, because we saw his statement last week sort of prevaricate rather obviously and be like, oh, almost certainly the autumn, but, leaving the door open for a May election at the same time. I think it's very unlikely to be May for the simple reason that he thinks he's going to lose and he doesn't want to not be Prime Minister. So the later he can push out that date, the more likely he is to do so. He will push it, I think, to the autumn. And I doubt it will do him any good at all. When you look at even the way this year has begun already, we're just Parliament hasn't even come back yet, and we're already dealing with resignations, with by-elections building up, with rebellions over legislation. There are very few indicators that suggest that his fate will improve.
When do you think the election will be, Katie?
I think autumn's always been the most likely. I think, therefore, for them to choose to go early would have been the statement move. I think Rishi Sunak had to put a lid on it because the speculation was getting to such a point. You could see, even though Labour did it last week, you could see it getting to a point where if he, didn't go in the spring and he hadn't done anything to cool it, everyone's, he's fit, he's lost his nerve. I still think, it hasn't come from nowhere, this idea of a spring election. There are people around Rishi Sunak who would prefer to go in the spring, or that's been their thinking in places. I don't think it's completely impossible, but I do think probably the reality is quite easy to have these theories about, almost 5D chess where it's smart to go in a certain time, even though it goes against the odds with the polls where they are. I think as you get closer, probably the laws of gravity suggest that you are more likely to push it back if something hasn't shown up. So autumn, most likely.
Autumn, but you know, if things go wrong, his hand could be forced in. And he's got a lot on his agenda, hasn't he? As you say, we've already had resignations this year. We've got the row over Rwanda and a possible rebellion over North Sea oil and gas. That's back in the Commons today.
Yeah, and I don't think we're likely to see that collapse in on itself. And I have to say, persistently, what we see from moderate Conservatives is quite a lot of bark and very little bite when it comes down to it. So you look at realistically who's really going to vote against this thing, who's even likely necessarily to abstain. I think those numbers will be relatively small. However, we've now seen a resignation. We've now seen another by-election that's going to come up in the early part of this year as a result of what is taking place with that bill. But will it stop the bill from getting through? I very much doubt it.
What about Labour, Katie? What are the challenges Keir Starmer faces?
I think there's always something about being so priced in as the party that's ahead. I think that, you know, it's very hard to find somebody who doesn't really think that Keir Starmer currently is on the path to winning the next election. If you look at the polling, if you look at where the Tories are, and therefore that does create a space where I think you have greater scrutiny for the election. And I think during the election campaign, it'll be a lot more about what are Labour's plans? Is that realistic? Because people were saying, well, what if you have this majority of 80, 100? And I think that can be quite difficult, something some in Labour are worried about. And then also, you know, where are their weaknesses? And I think you've seen all the rows about the green spending, the 28 billion in the past few weeks. We know the Tories want to ramp up loads of tax. So can Keir Starmer find a line where he said he's going to go along with it, but it still feels when different members of the shadow cabinet speak, they say slightly different things on it. So are they going to be able to hold the line or find a position that they're all comfortable with?
And, of course, not just here that we're seeing elections, in loads of countries around the world, of course, not least including America, Ian. Are we going to see a comeback for Trump? Definitely, you think?
I mean, I'm certainly going to run in that election. Whether he wins is another matter. But actually, you know what? You can look at the US and you can look at the European parliamentary elections this year in quite similar ways, that there are real chances for right-wing populists, authoritarian right-wing populists, to try and secure quite extraordinary degrees of power. In the US, I think almost indicating the end of the US as a functioning democratic state. I mean, at that point, you really are talking about a very dangerous moment in American history. But also in Europe, you're looking at a parliament that has, you know, influence over the entirety of the continent. And right-wing populists are very likely to make quite strong gains in that election.
And Katie, you know, we heard from Mike Pence on Sky News yesterday. He said that the US needs new leadership, but he thinks the Republicans could come up with a better candidate than Trump. I mean, do you think there's anyone who can take him on in the Republican Party?
I mean, it's hard to see at the moment. I mean, there's some attention that Nikki Haley is getting, but then someone's saying, oh, is that so? Through her criticism, she ends up almost being his running partner. So real like that. I think at the moment it does feel as though Donald Trump is the most likely, but of course you have all the legal issues relating to Donald Trump. So it could be that they are forced into a different candidate. I think the risk for those who don't want Trump to succeed, though, is, you know, the sense of people not being allowed to back for him in certain areas almost helps his, you know, rallying cry of everyone's trying to stop me, the establishment, and he still does find a way through and has boosted his support.
OK, Katie Bowles, political editor of The Spectator, and Ian Dunn, columnist at The Eye. Thank you both so much for taking us through the week's politics. Now, Christopher Nolan's blockbuster biopic about the father of the atomic bomb took home the top gong at the Golden Globes overnight. Winners too for the Oppenheimer director and his leading man, Cillian Murphy. But upset for some fans of Barbie. Poor Things pipped it to the best comedy musical, but Barbie did win an honour. Arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
And the Golden Globe goes to Barbie.
Pitched as the Battle of Barbenheimer, this year's Golden Globes dominated by two films that, when combined, made over $2 billion, while Barbie was recognised for its box office achievement.
Thank you. We would like to dedicate this to every single person on the planet who dressed up and went to the greatest place on earth, the movie theatres.
This was Christopher Nolan's night. His nuclear arms race thriller taking home Best Film, Best Director, as well as a win for its leading man.
First question, do I have lipstick all over my nose? I'm just going to leave it. I was in the hands of a visionary director, a master, and I want to thank Chris and Emma.
Amy, are you okay?
Yeah.
As for TV, while chaotic road rage thriller Beef and frenetic kitchen drama The Bear both went away with 3 Globes each. Perhaps more predictable, the cold-blooded power plays of the final season of Sky Atlantic's Succession sweeping the board, with wins for Sarah Snook.
This is really heavy.
Matthew McFadden.
I just adored every second playing the weird and wonderful human grease stain that is Tom Wamsgard.
And Kieran Culkin, rather fittingly lording it up over his rivals.
This is a nice moment. Suck it, Pedro. Sorry.
British showrunner Jesse Armstrong admitting it hadn't been an easy decision to end the series.
We decided this was the right time to end the show, and that was very bittersweet.
And the Golden Globe goes to Oppenheimer!
The first big awards event of the year, recognising the huge cultural impact of some of the most critically acclaimed drama we've seen in a long time. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Now, you might have heard Sky News Breakfast is getting a fresh new look. Kay Burley's here, and also
it's weird sitting here.
Yeah, it must be weird. I'm the same. I hate being interviewed. It's fine asking the questions.
Exactly. Good morning.
I'm
This is Gareth. Let me introduce
Good morning.
Gareth. Gareth Jane. Jane Gareth.
Good morning.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you.
Kay, tell us first of all what's happening with this relaunch. It's very exciting.
So the first thing to note is that we start at 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, Gareth does with Mari, and then I come on at 7. We've got a brand new state-of-the-art studio, which is amazing. Cost us quite a lot of money. Looks amazing. You'll see it for yourself on Monday. And I often felt as though I was sort of sitting on my own, not having anyone to chat to.
No
so I've got some new friends, including Gareth.
Yeah. And Gareth, so tell us about your role, Gareth.
Kicking things off from 6. I've got the early start, me and Mari, 6 till 7, and then Kay, 7 till 10. And there is so much news to get through as well, isn't there? Especially this year, US election coming up. There's the UK election on the horizon too. So we've got more capacity, more space, more cameras, incredible new set, newsroom as well, lots of people coming and going. So that kind of breakfast family.
Yeah, exactly. And the new set allows me to eyeball the minister much more than you can sitting here literally straight opposite them. So that will be entertaining, especially with, as you say, a general election coming up. Prime Minister saying second half of the year. Let's see.
Just looking at the new set, are the ministers going to have to stand, or are you going to let them sit down?
No, we'll let them sit down unless they're very naughty, and then of course they'll have to stand up. But in the fullness of time, we'll be moving back into this studio to do those sort of interviews as well. So, yeah, we're taking over the whole of this floor.
Well, it's going to be really exciting years to come, isn't it, Kay?
Yeah, most certainly is. Can we have a look at the picture of the team?
Yeah, we showed it before. Let's show it again.
Oh, did we? Oh, let's.
There they are.
There we go. Yeah, there you are.
Yes.
In the middle, Mari, of course, everybody knows, and Wilfred, who many of our viewers will know as well. He will also be part of the new breakfast family, won't he?
Popping up each hour between 7 and 10, showing us what's coming up later in the day. There's a rate review, for example, looking ahead to the big events that are going to happen throughout the course of the day, coming to us live from Osterley.
And we want our viewers, morning everybody, to get involved as well with your thoughts at the end, whatever the talking point of the day is, to send in their thoughts. Either, I don't think we've decided yet how we're going to do that.
No, it's work in progress.
Yeah, I think we should give them your phone number.
My phone number is 07.
That's what we should do.
Quite scary thought. Well, listen, best of luck with it. Looking forward to it. It's launching Monday.
Monday the 15th, 6 till 10 every weekday. Of course, Anna joining us on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays as well.
Absolutely, and I'll be around when you guys are off. So fantastic.
Fantastic.
Well,
Thanks for having us.
you're very welcome. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast today, a call from the RSPCA for people to do more to help animals as the charity marks its 200th birthday.
Breakfast is becoming even brighter here on Sky News. There's a new studio, a new start time of 6 a.m. and some new faces.
OK, yes, we'll bring you all the top stories from around the globe.
And here in Westminster as we count down to an election.
Plus a look ahead to the stories that'll be making headlines on Sky News throughout the day.
That's your New Look breakfast show, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. here on Sky News.
So the Taliban government have been in power since 2021, and in that time, They have built bridges and built roads and infrastructure, and the country is coming to a point of peace. But they just don't recognize women. Women's education after the 6th grade doesn't exist. Women are not allowed to go to beauty parlors, which have been closed. There are parks are closed, they can't work for NGOs. And at this current day and age, that is unacceptable. That's 20 million Afghan women who are being treated as second-class citizens, and that's what I tried to highlight with my film. Well, Afghanistan has such a unique history in the sense that in my lifetime, the country's flag has changed 19 times. It's just a chaotic time of government after government, and every single time, the women have always been victims to all these new different regimes, and they've always been impacted, and it's just enough. There is no excuse for women not to be able to study. 3,000 Afghan women were meant to join the Afghan service as doctors, but the board examinations were cancelled, and they are just at home doing nothing. As a country, we need stability and our economy to rise. We need all the help we can get. So it just doesn't make sense that this policy set forth by the Afghan government is in place. It's completely ridiculous. The world is at a time where there's just chaos and upsetting events happening everywhere, but at the same time, the Afghan women are being forgotten. And this is what I've tried to do with my film Yellow, and it's resonated so much around the world. I get messages every day from people who've seen it and feel that it's a message that needs to be told. Women are becoming invisible again. And as an Afghan myself, I can't let that happen. It's my duty as an artist and as a filmmaker to try to bring that to life.
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Now, this year marks 200 years of the RSPCA. And to celebrate the occasion, the UK's oldest and largest animal welfare charity is urging more people than ever to take action to change the lives of animals. New figures show that in the last 10 years alone, the charity's found homes for more than 400,000 pets in need. But now it wants to go further. Well, here to talk more about this is Joe Toscano from the RSPCA. Joe, lovely to talk to you. Looking back over the 200 years, you've obviously not been there for that long, but what has the RSPCA achieved, do you think?
Well, 200 years is a really long time. As you said, we're the oldest animal charity. So it's also, when we were founded, it sparked a global animal welfare movement. As you said, these amazing rehoming figures. We've helped millions of animals find homes, be rehabilitated and rescued, but also we've changed 400 laws, and we do a lot of education work as well. We were founded to prevent cruelty and change minds, and that's really been the backbone of everything we've done since we were founded.
When it was founded, what was the era like, and what were the kind of concerns that people had about animal welfare in those days? I imagine they're enormously different to what they are now.
Well, different in some ways, and still, shamefully, some things are the same. So back then, there's a lot of working animals. So the very first law that was passed was 2 years before we were founded, the Cattle Act. And that was the first time animals were ever protected. But then 11 years after we were founded, in 1835, there was an act to ban bull baiting and bear baiting and cockfighting. So these things were just day-to-day entertainments for people. So attitudes have changed hugely. But we are still facing massive challenges. You know, industrial farming is a big issue from the extent of suffering that we see on our farms. And so building a more compassionate farming system is a real focus for us.
And would you say that was where the RSPCA's focus is now, that it's moving more to things like farming rather than people being cruel to their own pets?
I mean, our rescue work is vital and it's crucial to what we do, and that will always be a key part of the RSPCA. But as I say, we've changed 400 laws. I don't think people realise how much campaigning we do and how much law changing we do. And that affects millions of animals, not just here, but around the world. So doing that work, we can't do it alone. We need people to support us. We need other organisations and other big charities. These are huge challenges that we're facing. And the more people that join us, the more real and lasting change we can make for animals.
I mean, do you think it's right that, I mean, obviously, you know, not denigrating the RSPCA at all, but here in the UK, more money goes to animal charities than it does to charities that help children. And I wonder how you feel about that. Do you think that's the right kind of emphasis that we have in the UK? What does it say about society?
Well, do you know what? It's all about being compassionate, and that is a big part of the work that we do. We go into schools and we teach children to be compassionate to animals, and we believe that that helps them be a more compassionate person all round. It helps them understand how their actions affect other people. So, you know, people are animal lovers, but there's space for everyone.
How has the cost of living affected animal welfare? Has there been a big issue? I mean, we know that during COVID, for example, so many people got pets. What's happened since then?
Well, that's it. We've seen the long effects of that lots of people, there are far more pets in our society. And we have seen neglect and abandonment figures rise to a 3-year high this year. So more people are sadly abandoning their pets. People are struggling with the cost of living. We have a cost of living hub on our website, which offers advice to help cut the costs while not compromising welfare. And we have a pet food bank scheme as well, which has delivered 1.5 million meals to needy pets this year. So that really helps keep, you know, loving families together with their animals.
So we look back on the 200 years. What are the changes that the RSPCA would still like to see looking to the future?
Well, I think, as I've mentioned, industrial farming is a massive issue for us. And it's not just an issue for animals, it's an issue for the planet, it's an issue for human health as well. Often what is good for animals is good for us. So one particular issue, probably the biggest welfare issue we see in this country, is the suffering of meat chickens. So they have short, brutal lives, but it's all behind the scenes. People don't realise this. The sheer numbers, 1 billion slaughtered each year in this country, and many of them just don't have a life worth living. So we want to build a more compassionate farming system in this country.
OK, Jo Toscano from the RSPCA, marking 200 years of existing. Good to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the conditions are going to be quiet and cold this week, with a freshening breeze bringing a significant chill to southern parts of the country. This morning, there'll be a widespread frost. Overnight temperatures have dropped close to or below freezing. Patches of dense freezing fog over parts of Ireland, Scotland and northwestern England will be slow to clear. Some may linger throughout the day. Showers in the southeast will turn wintry over the high ground as they spread westward. For much of the country, it'll be a dry morning with variable amounts of cloud and some sunny spells. Temperatures will remain in low single figures, but it's going to feel much colder in the windy south. Showers will reach central southern England by early evening. And then overnight, the showers will clear the southwest of the UK to leave a largely dry night. But there's going to be another widespread frost with patchy fog likely over central and northern Scotland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That was Sky News Breakfast. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll be back from 7 o'clock tomorrow, but do stay with us. Belle Donati has got all the headlines coming up for you next here on Sky News. Don't go anywhere.